Welcome to the inaugural virtual edition of the Hindustan Times Lenovo SmarterEd Conclave. The theme of the conclave is the new order of education. Now, technology has enabled institutes, educators, students, and corporates to rethink the future of learning and education. Even as technological innovation and solutions lead to progression in education, concerns about digital inequality, educator workforce training, and result-oriented tech advancements continue to rise. Lenovo SmarterEd Conclave, which is presented by Hindustan Times, brings together thought leaders, policymakers, educators, and industry experts to envision an India-centric education system that can contribute directly to the nation's transformation in view of the national education policy. This first-of-its-kind event will also focus on the emerging digital divide, teacher upskilling, and the role of cutting-edge technology solutions for the future of education. With the presence of decision-makers from kindergarten and universities, schools, the conclave is slated to be a win-all event. We look forward to 2 days of invigorating discussions that is being opened with a keynote address from the Honorable Minister of Education, Dharmendra Pradhan.
Distinguished speakers, education and industry experts, participants, ladies and gentlemen, my greetings to all of you. It is my pleasure to be part of the SmarterEd Conclave organized by the Hindustan Times. I am delighted to share my thoughts on the new order of education with this august gathering. Indeed, it is a most opportune moment for us to be discussing this topic when India is successfully emerging out of a COVID-19 pandemic wave. As you all know, that the unprecedented advent of the pandemic had adversely and significantly affected our lives. No sector remained indifferent to its impact, including the education sector. However, our students, our teachers, and the entire Indian education system demonstrated remarkable resilience in the face of the pandemic. Abiding by our commitment to provide quality education to all, we shifted one of the world's largest education systems from an offline to an online mode. It is also during the pandemic that India came up with the first education policy of 21st century, the National Education Policy 2020. After more than 3 decades, under the visionary leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, the Indian education system is on the cusp of a massive transformation. Basing itself on the pillars of accessibility, affordability, equity and quality, the NEP 2020 aims to overhaul our education landscape for the greater good for our children. With a set of far-reaching recommendations, the policy has given us a roadmap for our future. My dear friends, one of the lessons from the pandemic has been that the technology will play a crucial role in the way we acquire knowledge. I am reminded of the story of Ishaq Munda, a 35-year wage laborer from Sambalpur district of Odisha. Being a class 7 dropout, Ishaq learned how to monetize creative content just by watching videos on YouTube. By merely utilizing technology, Ishaq is today leading a decent standard of living in his village with the earning from YouTube. He is also now a YouTube influencer in Odia culture and cuisine. Honorable Prime Minister himself appreciated Ishaq's desire to learn and how he utilized technology for it in his Mann Ki Baat. I am proud to share that the NEP 2020 we aim to utilize this potential of technology and empower our students and teachers with a flexible and advanced learning teaching process. In tune with the NEP 2020, the National Education Technology Forum and the National Digital Education Architecture shall create a confluence of technology and knowledge which is also the need of the hour. But friends, while we emphasize the significance of technology in the future of the education sector, a hybrid education model wherein technology will supplement the classroom teaching experience in the future is vital. Indeed, technology will be utilized to facilitate a better teaching learning process and to make education more accessible. However, this will not devalue the importance of in-person learning. Friends, it is more than obvious that the pandemic has led to innovative way of learning. It has given us the chance to reflect upon our past and to prepare for the future. Just days ago, on Shiksha Parva, Honorable Prime Minister launched various initiatives such as Vindhyajali and reiterated that it is Sabka Prayas which will lead to the holistic development of society. In the same spirit, our collective responsibility is to implement the NEP 2020 which will lay down the foundation of new order of education. With these words, I once again congratulate Hindustan Times for organizing this SmarterEd Conclave. My best wishes to you all. Thank you, friends. Namaskar.
Greeting, friends. The pandemic has caused an unprecedented disruption in educational systems around the world, with total or near total closures of offline schools, universities, and colleges. At the height of the crisis, it's estimated that over 1.5 billion students were impacted by school closures. According to UNICEF, the pandemic is affecting more primary learners than any other group. The good news, however, is that some countries have already begun reopening their schools. And herein lies an opportunity, with remote schooling and online learning becoming the main models for educational delivery. In other words, the pandemic is accelerating digital learning that has been gradually picking up momentum for over a decade. These are critical moves to bridging the digital divide, especially in the field of education. That said, teachers and students are still grappling with technological challenges, even as we appear to be moving towards a hybrid education model, similar to the hybrid office model that employees and employers are getting used to. Bridging the educational divide is easier said than done. It needs government support. At the SmarterEd Conclave hosted by the Hindustan Times, Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan spoke about India's new order of education, the National Education Policy 2020, which is based on 4 principles: accessibility, affordability, equity, and more importantly, quality. He highlighted how this NEP 2020 will use the National Education Technology Forum and the National Digital Education Architecture to create a confluence of technology and knowledge. Now, this clearly implies that we need the participation of technology companies to make NEP 2020 a success. It's in this context that I would like to welcome Shailendra Katyal. He is the India MD of Lenovo, a tech company that's doing its bit to bridge the digital divide. Lenovo's vision is not only to enable smarter technology for all, but also bridge the gap to provide innovation to all. Let's figure out how Lenovo does this. Hi, Shailendra. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Leslie. Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. So, Shailendra, I mean, these are tough times. I think the whole world has gone through a kind of a turbulence. Business models have changed over a period of time, and it looks like the education sector is also undergoing an upheaval. A lot of positives have also come out from this. But before we come to the positives, let's talk a little about how big is this is the scale of this digital divide. How big is this issue as such?
Yeah, so very valid question, Leslie, and I really like the way you put it in context that the pandemic has just been one more acceleration or a trigger, which was maybe something that was already in motion. Because as we look at the world over the last few decades, it is becoming a lot more complex and a lot more challenging for people to navigate. And as we looked at the world becoming more complex, clearly the education system also had to change, and different countries are at a different level of evolution on how fundamentally education had to evolve to cope with some of the new challenges that the world was facing. And yes, the pandemic has accelerated the motion that was already on. Now, when we talk about the digital divide, it comes in the context of a new way of learning. And the new way of learning, as per all expert educators that we work with, It's about being very, very student centric. It's about being a lot more personalized. It's not about one size fits all. It's not by learning by rote, which is what maybe you and I grew up with, which is to memorize and then pass an exam. It is about creating problem solvers and creating a very new kind of skill set to take on some of the global challenges that we see. Now, in that context, when we talk about a student-centric education system, or we talk about creating problem-solving skills, clearly technology has to play a very, very critical role. Because if we talk about not having one size fits all or having asynchronous learning, then clearly people have to learn on their own pace, and then you can't have everyone in the classroom learning at the same time. And that is where if you have technology supporting you, you can have people getting to master a subject, learn at their own pace, learn at their own time. So fundamentally, to support a new way of learning, there's no other way and to do it at scale than to do it with the support of technology. And in that context, the question that you asked, digital divide, especially for a country like India, becomes very, very important, because if you have uh, say one device per person to learn, we have 30 crore students, which is the largest student pool in the world, but only 15 to 20% of them have access to a device or internet to really learn at their own pace. So clearly, digital divide is a global problem. India is facing it a lot more, given the fact that we do have demographic dividend. We are the youngest population in the world, but do we have the digital infrastructure to support this very, very large pool of learners? Is the question that we have to solve for. And clearly, it's a large problem. It can't be solved by one company or the government alone. The entire ecosystem has to come together to support this new way of learning.
Yeah, I think you have touched on a very important point at this point in time. So, of course, we will require government support, which I will come to in a bit. But before that, I think whenever people talk about digital divide as such, they typically, think in their mind that perception is that, okay, this digital divide is an urban-rural divide, which is not really the case. I think even in the urban infrastructure, we have the questions of whether it's poor a power supply in many areas, even within, like say, Silicon Valley of India is Bangalore, but you do not have, uninterrupted power supply. High bandwidth is an issue. There are other issues also probably on the content part of it, whether we have enough educational content in Indian languages. So there are many other such problems that you as when you are implementing technology, you may have encountered. So can you just highlight some of these issues?
Yeah, so again, a very valid observation, Leslie, because digital divide can be a very overarching term, but you can slice it in multiple ways. So at a very basic level, do you have access to internet? And there I do believe that the government and the country has progressed a fair bit. Now almost, given the data point that you want to refer to, 70-80% of India has some kind of basic internet connection. But then to the point that you made, okay, giving electricity is one part, but how many hours of the day do you have access to, which is the quality of the internet access which comes in. So a lot of the country is still on 2G, 4G is still not fully prevalent. So that is a quality problem to be solved for. But having internet is only the first thing. Then what are you accessing the internet with? And especially in the context of education, if you have a smartphone, yes, that's a primary device, but allows for only one-way learning. And if you have to really replicate learning which happens in a classroom, somebody also needs to write, right? So somebody has to show that there is progress in learning. So from one-way learning to two-way kind of a dialogue, you do then need a computing device or a touch device on a larger screen to come in. So that's the second part of the digital divide, that only 15 to 20% of the country has access to I would say, educational device. Smartphone is there, which is a larger penetration, but it does allow for only one-way consumption. It doesn't allow for two-way dialogue to happen. And then the third problem that you said, right? India is such a complex country, number of languages, number of educational systems. And there we do welcome the government's new education policy, because it is trying to harmonize, it is trying to be in step with the modern pedagogy and the global way of teaching. So it will harmonize, but obviously it's a new thing. It will take a few years to really get implemented. But these are the three big challenges. One is the basic access to internet. Then do you have the right device to access the internet with? And then also what are you consuming finally? Is the methodology, pedagogy and content really geared up for preparing the learner to be ready for the future.
And also, do you see some kind of friction or some kind of resistance where teachers are being introduced to this kind of newer model of education? I mean, of course, because sometimes they are challenged because students today are no longer the students of our time. For instance, I think you rightly pointed out that we used to do it by, we used to memorize things, wrote as such. Today, you have people who have access to the internet who can ask the questions just referring to the internet immediately and challenge the teachers. Do you see that kind of friction also in this new kind of model that we are seeing?
Yeah, that is a starting point, right? Because and I would say maybe the learner is ready because there is access to the phone already at a young age, even in the rural areas like you spoke of. So they have access to technology to some way. It is intuitive, so it doesn't take too much to learn how to access the internet. But when you have to train the trainer to teach in the new world, it does require a fair bit of reskilling. And teachers have had a tough time from whatever our interactions have been. Suddenly, even replicating, they're so used to using a blackboard to scribble and communicate their point of view. Now, how do you replicate that in a remote learning environment? So it has required a lot of reskilling, and but I would also see it as a huge opportunity because if you look at the physical world of learning, the best teachers were limited to a single class, right? So if you look at the demand side, there are a lot of hungry learners, a lot of bright, curious minds, and the best teachers now are able to talk to many, many more students beyond the physical limitations of a classroom. And that's the beauty of technology. It can make the demand supply problem look very different, which was historically confined to the four walls of a room. But does it require reskilling? Does it require a new way? And maybe the teachers also embracing this brave new world that I'm no longer able to influence only 30-40 students in a class, but the whole world is practically their oyster and they can influence a lot more young minds. But yes, the reskilling is required from the blackboard to teaching in a virtual world.
And I think also one important point is that basically, I think, remember, some 20 till about even 20 years back, teachers used to test the knowledge of students. Today, even students are testing the knowledge of teachers. Because teachers also have to continuously do that reskilling, as you rightly pointed out. How are companies and governments collaborating? What are the kind of models that you're seeing? Are there 2 or 3 kind of broad models that we're seeing? Because specifically, of course, I know that Lenovo is doing a lot of work in this, but I will come to the Lenovo part in a slight in a bit. But overall, are there kind of 2 or 3 broad models that companies and governments are using or adopting to collaborate? Because if you remember, Dharmendra Pradhan spoke about this confluence of technology and knowledge.
Yeah, and the beauty is that because we are a global company, we do get to engage with governments and the ecosystem all across the world. We see a huge congruence because everyone realizes that solving for humanity's greatest challenges in a connected world will not happen by one country or one player alone. Everyone has to work together. And there's quite a bit of congruence or uniformity in how the whole world is thinking about it, right? Which is to prepare learners with a more problem solving or a skill based mindset. And given the complexity of the world, we do see that a lot of niche skills, specializations will start coming in. So this one size fits all versus creating experts in deep solutioning, deep verticals. Those are the kind of learners that everyone wants in the future. Now, coming to how the governments are seeing it, I think Mr. Pradhan put it quite well on the principles on which the new education policy is built on, right? Which is affordability, accessibility, equity. So there's this thing about inclusive world, right? So you can't have a digital divide if you want the entire world to move together. And somewhere almost all governments, including the Indian government, is making this almost like a fundamental right. Right to education has been there. I think it will soon evolve to right to digital literacy as almost like a fundamental right. It's as basic, and we did hear Minister of State for IT also speak about it. It is as fundamental as air and water. So that is where I think this accessibility, affordability, there's huge congruence there, where companies also want the same thing, right? That as you want the addressable market to increase, you do want penetration to come in with more and more affordability and accessibility options. And this thing about equity, which is where I think digital divide comes into play in a big way. How do we ensure that nobody gets left behind? And that is where again I see a confluence of minds there, where people do want to have diversity programs, inclusion programs, and there is one part is the commercial aspect, but almost all companies, including ours, are doing a lot on the citizenship, on the CSR side, to ensure that if people can't afford one, can we at least allow access in some form through the citizenry efforts that all of us are putting in. And we are not alone in this. I do see the government placing a lot of emphasis. Just as a case in point, right, a lot of state governments are giving laptops and tablets free to students, and that's been part of many manifestos. So it may be started as a election premise, but the fact that it fundamentally changes the life of the student and also the household the moment they grow up on a laptop with access to quality internet and education. So just to repeat myself, we see huge congruence, a lot of coming of the minds together, and not just in India, globally we see that happen. And even in mature markets, we see a lot of this effort of getting to the next level of technology adoption in schools. So there are two parts of digital infrastructure. One is at home, which is what the person may buy on his own. But how do people even smartify the classrooms? And that is also in country, we see a lot of effort that a lot of the government schools are getting smartified, which is very, very progressive. As we look at the national, the new education policy getting.
And I think the government has done a great job on the part of the view of in financial inclusion, for instance. So we do have a model that we can go by at this point in time. And now it's just a matter of extending these kind of models into the education field. And of course, by taking cognizance of all the caveats that we spoke about, like increasing bandwidth speeds, etc., which I guess will take some time, but at least we are taking steps in the right direction. And I think even when you spoke of the principles, I think the fourth principle that we added is quality. And I like that. So at least they're speaking about not only equity, affordability, accessibility, but also quality. So these are good things. When you talk about Lenovo, what is Lenovo as a company specifically doing? Because I know that you have some partnerships with NGOs. So you're trying to do it at the grassroots level. That's the understanding that one gets. So I'd like you to, talk a little about that.
Yeah, so we see ourselves playing an important part, but it is a large complex problem, and not just in country, but globally it's a big problem that how do we really look at the future of education. So we work very closely with the entire ecosystem, and starting with partnerships on curriculum development, but finally we'd come back to our core. Our core is that we are a global tech player. We are the #1 PC brand in the world. So how do we ensure that we are doing our bit using technology? So first is you spoke about our vision statement, right? It's about smarter technology for all, and we do place a lot of accent on that last two words, which is for all, because we do believe that unless technology is affordable and everyone has a hand in it, then we are not necessarily solving for humanity's greatest challenges, which is one of our stated intent. So making technology affordable, accessible is a big part that we play in, and given our scale size, we do have economies of scale. We do end up making devices far more affordable than anyone else can, and we do have the width, right? Very few companies can give you everything from a smartphone to a data center. So we do have that width of technology also to solve for education as a problem. So on that basic premise of accessibility and affordability, I do see us playing an important part. The second is as not just device in the learner's hands, but we spoke about digitization of the entire ecosystem, right? Finally, the classroom, the teacher, the educator, everyone has to get equipped with that. And when you talk about distributed learning or hybrid learning, because none of us believe that it will go back completely to what it was earlier. Even if schools open, finally there's a power in using technology to give more access to students. So there we do have built some solutions as well end to end, because the moment you have a distributed class, security ends up being a worry. High screen time, and how do you still ensure that the social engagement continues? Those are coming up as worries. So we are creating all these hybrid models. One is smartifying the device itself, making it cheaper, more affordable. The other is we are smartifying classrooms, and I spoke about we see some government schools in the country taking that first step of smartifying the classroom. So you'll have digital signboards, you'll have teachers equipped with touch screens, and then they are able to distribute their knowledge over a much larger pool. So we do have those end-to-end solutions for smarter classrooms. And the third, which I spoke of, which is our citizenship, the fact that we are committing a large part of our CSR budgets to solve for education or digital divide as a problem. So these are the three legs. One is on the basic core hardware side, where we do make devices which are smarter, affordable, accessible, the smarter classroom piece, and the third is our citizenship.
Yeah, I think what I like most about what you spoke about is that you know how you're going to stick to your core and then help the ecosystem kind of stuff. And I think that's pretty interesting, but that's a good model to replicate. And in that context, what is your message to the larger ecosystem? You're dealing with such a big ecosystem of players. Is there some kind of message that you want to give out to the broader ecosystem on how they can what they can be helped?
Yep, and like I've said earlier, it will require a lot of collective effort to solve for, especially in India, right? We spoke about the largest learning pool in the world, but only 15-20% have access to a digital technology to learn. And even if you do a broad math, right, you talk about a tablet, a decent tablet with a touch screen that people are able to both consume content, and students also need to then communicate back with the teachers in terms of projects, some writing. So at a basic level, your tablet itself, if you have to give to the balance 80%, it's a $24 billion spend to be managed. If you talk about a device with a keyboard, which is what a laptop is, and actually that's the recommended device, because you have to replicate writing in some form, right? How do you replicate writing with only touch? It still needs a keyboard. If you want to give a device like an entry-level laptop also to all the students, it's a $74 billion spend to be managed. So that's the scale of the problem. And I'm not even getting to the problem of data connectivity and the content piece to be managed. So everyone needs to contribute, everyone needs to chip in. We'll play our part, and the government is I would say creating the right programs for companies to come forth. We do have the most valuable ed tech startup coming out of in the world, coming out of the country. So people do recognize that if at all the problem has to be solved for the world, India is a good crucible to do that experimentation. So ed tech will be a focus. How do we get more content in which is localized, more vernacular stuff coming in? How do we ensure that it is not learning by rule, reasoning kind of skills which are important? How do we make devices more affordable? And the government is making steps for localizing manufacturing, etc., which should lead to that in the near future. And then the quality of internet. I think these 3-4 pieces, if they come together, but it will require collaboration. And I think we are making these efforts. This conclave is one part of that, where we are trying to bring the ecosystem together.
Yeah, but I think the heartening fact out here is that we are seeing the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, falling together. I think that's the good part of it.
Yeah, and in our past conversation, you did speak about this not being a new initiative, right? There was this one laptop per child kind of initiative even in the past. But to the point that you made at the beginning of the conversation, I think the timing is right. The pandemic has forced us. It's been maybe a negative trigger, but I think looked at it in a positive light. It is now a positive force for good to fundamentally change education in the country.
So Shailendra, I think this has been quite an insightful discussion. Thank you for spelling out Lenovo's plans to bridge the digital divide. We hope that many companies will join force with you to in this because it's a collaborative effort, of course, with government support. Our nation, as I think we all will agree, will thrive only if it gets a good education system, and more importantly, only if all have access to this knowledge base with the help of technology, something that Lenovo is doing. So once again, Shailendra, thank you for your time and wish you and your company the best on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate your time as well.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us here at Hindustan Times Lenovo SmarterEd Conclave, wherein we are trying to bring together policymakers and industry leaders as well as experts from various fields of the government to talk about how India's literary landscape is changing. Today we have with us Union Minister for State, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekharji. Sir, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out to speak to us about digital interventions that are happening in the education sector. So to start with, it has been this government's flagship program, which is called Digital India. So, I mean, what kind of infrastructural changes are we looking at, especially post the pandemic, to help aid a better education system in India?
So, first of all, Diksha, thank you for having me, and thank you for having this discussion about Digital India. If you look back at the last 5 years and see the progress that we have made in Digital India in terms of digitalization of government, digitalization of the citizen, bringing citizen and government closer, and building the infrastructure that enables that. If you look at that and see that between 2014 and 2021, we have gone from being one of the largest unconnected countries to being one of the largest connected countries in the world. And the fact that during the COVID, the resilience that our economy showed, the resilience that our citizenry could demonstrate, was to a large effect enabled by the Digital India program and all of the investments that have been made over the last 6 years. If you understand that and then look forward to the post-COVID world, I think it is clear that when working from home is becoming a new normal, in a sense, tele-connecting to various public services is the new normal, that the internet and the power of the internet and the power of Digital India will only continue to grow and transform and impact positively the lives of citizens, the nature of governance, and indeed the entire digitalization of businesses per se. So even if you look at education and skilling as one element of what a citizen's life and a citizen experiences in his or her life, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, and there should be no doubt in anybody's mind, that Digital India will play a very powerful transformational role in the post-COVID world, even in that space.
So when we talk about digital infrastructure and how India is growing, and you said you're connecting all parts of the country now, especially post-COVID, that process has been accelerated, so to speak. But access has always been a key question. Can we ensure that all citizens in India, especially children, who, as the Prime Minister himself has said, lost about a year and a half of their lives because of COVID-19, how do we ensure that we will have last mile connectivity?
No, and I think that is the most powerful question to ask in the post-COVID world, because the demand for internet and demand for connectivity and demand for access, which was, let us say, growing at a certain pace, now there is an absolute unanimous consent amongst every man, woman, and child who's a citizen that along with water, electricity, housing, the internet and the connectivity to the internet and the access to the internet is almost as equal a priority for all of them. And that was, in a sense, emphasized during this once in a lifetime global pandemic that we've all had to go through and suffer over the last 2 years. Let me give you a small example, anecdotal thing that I want to share with you and your viewers, Diksha, that recently, as part of a larger program, people like us had visited districts as part of a Jan Ashirwad Yatra. That was something that my party, the BJP, wanted our ministers to do, all ministers to do, visit people. And I visited over 1,000 kilometers, and I visited 6 districts. And one of the very interesting things that, well, I think all of us intuitively knew, but it was so gratifying to hear this from mothers and people that whom you do not conventionally think of the internet people, and mothers coming up to me in various North Karnataka districts and saying, why is my child not able to work from home from his district rather than having to work from home in Bengaluru? Why can't he work from home in Sirsi? Why can't he work from home in Hubli? Why can't he work from home in Kodagu, Mangaluru, etc.? And that is the most powerful narrative you can put forth on the need for connectivity. And I think India, between 14 and 21, we are about 800 million, 80 crore Indians online, which makes us one of the largest countries that are connected. But at the same time, we have almost 40 crores Indians still unconnected. And a lot of them are in rural communities and rural villages. And that is a program that the government of India's BharatNet, the flagship broadband rural connectivity program, is attempting to address. And I think you will see that will accelerate in the coming months and years to make sure the other 400 million, the other 40 crore Indians who are today using the internet, by the way, they still have access to the internet, but they have it access through intermediaries like the common service centers. There are 4.5 lakh common service centers that our ministry has set up over the last 5 years, where people can go and access the internet behind common service centers desktop. But to allow 40 crore additional Indians to experience the internet on their phone or their device is something that the government is completely focused on, and I hope that we will be successful in delivering by establishing village connectivity, whether it's by radio, whether it's by FTTH, or whether it's coax to the home. Just like cable was revolutionized many years ago in India and brought TV and entertainment to the homes, I'm hopeful that over the next coming years we will deliver internet to those who continue to lack that type of connectivity to the house.
So you've been a part of several, I mean, you've been an industry expert. Now, of course, you're serving as a Union Minister of State. I mean, there is a special skill set that we need when it comes to internet connectivity, right? I mean, a lot of things are making it easier. You have phones where now you can send audio notes if you can't type, or regional language access. And I believe the ministry is also working on a language processing tool that will help enable people from different parts of the country to communicate with each other so that they can access all these facilities.
Absolutely.
So can we, I mean, because the new education policy also focuses on regional learning. So, I mean, what kind of interventions can we see on part of the government when it comes to that front?
No, and that's again, sorry to keep complimenting you, but I think that's again a very powerful question, because the vision of Bharat Jodo that our Honorable Prime Minister repeatedly talks about, and Ek Bharat, Shresh Bharat, is about making sure that everybody is united around the opportunities that the new education policy and skilling and digital technologies represent. And for that, one of the most important ingredients is to be able to deliver content and give access to the citizen in the language he or she understands or he or she uses. And so therefore, language translation missions, getting more and more content out there, whether it's educational content, whether it's government public service content out there in the languages that our citizens will consume it in, is an important priority. So it is all an integrated strategy, which is delivering content and services in the languages of the citizens want, giving them connectivity to the internet, and bringing more and more of government and services that the citizens want, bringing them online, which includes education, skilling, health, and you've already seen the issues of payment and other applications that are already online. So language is an absolute, especially for a country of our diversity and our span and our breadth in terms of culture and identities and geographies. Having content and having the ability to access these services and content online in the languages that are spoken, and not just English, or not just English and Hindi, is very, very important, and it's a very significant priority for our ministry.
So you mentioned that you've been touring across India and you've visited about 6 districts. What are the kind of concerns that people have on the ground? I mean, have they come to you with some particular kinds of problems that they're facing post-COVID in terms of accessing these?
No, fortunately, Diksha, the two portfolios that our Honorable Prime Minister has tasked me with, both skilling and in technology and electronics, both address really this aspirational India. I mean, it is addressing the millions and crores of our youngsters who, whether they are living in Sirsi in Karnataka or Jharkhand or Uttar Pradesh, or wherever they are, away from these typical metro cities, they are aspiring to, and they are legitimately aspiring to, the same kind of skills and the same kind of opportunities that their brother and sister in, let's say, Bengaluru, Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Gurugram have enjoyed for the last several years and several decades. So technology and skilling is that great equalizer, that way to ensure that the digital divide that has been talked about in several countries and that has caused a digital divide in several countries is not really the case in India. That technology must, and our Prime Minister has always said that technology must empower and transform the lives of citizens for it to be meaningful. And skilling must transform the lives of that person who does not have formal higher education and allow him to earn, him or her to an opportunity to prosperity and a good life. So these two are very, in my opinion, directly aimed at the people's aspirations. And throughout my the 6 district journey during the Jan Ashirwad Yatra, I could sense that people were excited about. Of course, everybody was coming out of COVID. People were everybody had struggled. But the general report card that I want to give you is that people were positive, people were looking forward with great deal of optimism, despite the fact that they had gone through the most harrowing 18-20 months of their lives, that they were looking to this really strong roadmap runway to opportunities that Atmanirbhar Bharat would be creating. And skilling and technology represented two sort of runways for the young Indian, in whether they were in these districts or they were in big metros, to exploit that or to partake that.
Both your portfolios also coalesce on the question of vocational courses that the new education policy is going to introduce. So, I mean, we will need a particular kind of curriculum, right, wherein you can have everyone access, whether it's coding or carpentry or whatever other options are being provided equally. So, I mean, is there a particular way to look at skilling in a certain sense, because you can merge the two of them? We're looking at a sort of a training before even, employability training, so to speak.
Diksha, I was not very involved in the formulation of the new education policy. I must confess that as a member of parliament, that was not an area that I was very heavily focused on. But after becoming a member of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's team, and specifically being in the skilling ministry, I have understood today, and I say this with no attempt at trying to overstate the fact, that the new education policy is simply the biggest reform for our younger generation ever done in this country. Post-independence, this is just simply the biggest transformation opportunity for lives of youngsters going forward. And I'll explain to you why briefly. For the last many years, for a youngster, the runway to life choices was you study, then you go through higher education, and you do whatever, engineering, BA, BSc, whatever, and you look for a job. And if for some reason your family conditions, your financial situation, your temperament did not allow you to do higher education, you pretty much dropped out of the education system. And then as dropouts, you looked at vocational training. As dropouts, you looked at skilling and looked at this almost like a plan B. What the new education policy does is very, very powerful. It creates from the get-go, from the early stages of education, two opportunities of growth for children. It allows children to pursue from the 6th standard onwards and the 8th standard onwards the traditional track to higher education, with obviously improved curriculum and improved skill sets and improved programs. But it also allows you from the 6th and 8th standard onwards to look at a vocational career built on skills, career not built on degrees. And then very powerfully at a higher level down the road, allow these two vocational and higher education streams to integrate through the academic banking of credit, where children can then move from vocational training to higher education and from higher education back to vocational training, as the case may be. I personally think the true potential of new education policy is going to be understood in the months and years to come as dramatically changing life choice options for the children of today. We are all obviously, we have grown beyond that, and it won't impact us. But I can assure you, and fortunately, unfortunately, my kids are also beyond schooling. But for the children that are children today and are going to be children in the coming years, this is going to create huge opportunities. And it is, in my opinion, going to realize the vision that India's demographic dividend of having such a young population can be used for the benefit of human resources and for the world, which is otherwise most democracies and countries have aging demographic dividends. So I personally am very excited by new education policy. I'm excited by the fact that vocational training and skilling are integrated into education at the school level. And I think this has the potential to transform children's lives and children's futures.
Of course, it will be a long-form reform. We'll have to wait to see its dividends, but I'm sure they'll come in due time, sir. But as an industry expert, I must also ask you, I mean, I speak to various stakeholders across, and I'm sure our viewers will be very interested. There's been a lot of talk about the batch of 2019, the one that is just graduated. And since they graduated in absentia, there's a concern about hiring them, employing them. I mean, where do they find these spaces? So is there a way to assuage industry leaders, whether it's, whether it's for any company, so to speak, any MNC? Is there a way to assure them that no, these children are equally talented and deserve to be in the job market?
No, I think there is this issue is a global issue. It's not an Indian issue alone. These two batches of children have gone through not just trauma, they've gone through a disruption of the kind that nobody before them or after them will ever experience. And so they are, in a sense, very special two generations or two batches. And I think as industry, as government, we need to be extra sensitive. I have urged in the small 1 or 2 forums that I was involved in, that industry must look at providing some special skilling programs for them. These are available online, and to the extent that these children have suffered some deficit in terms of being in school and being in class in terms of practicals and practical experience, that those are addressed through some add-on skilling programs that industry can do after they hire them. So I don't particularly see that they are disadvantaged in any way, but it does cast an obligation on those who hire from these 2 years and who admit them into higher education programs, etc., to be a little more careful with them. I think it's a legitimate ask of these children that we be more careful and sensitive about their progress than, let's say, the other children that have graduated before or will graduate later.
Are there any other interventions that the ministry is currently looking at across sectors? So, I mean, it does not necessarily have to be about education as such, but are there any new programs that we can expect from the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology at this crucial juncture where digitization is driving the economy on various fronts?
No, I think I don't want to pretend that we are going to do anything terribly new or earth-shattering in that. I think education and skilling is not about new ideas as much as bringing more passion into it and getting these, making sure that the children and youth have access to the skilling requirements or the learning requirements that they need for the current situation, current scenario, and for future. And for that, there are, the education system in India today has tremendous number of very, very committed, talented people who are committed to the cause of education. And that is one of the great things about our country, that the educationist in India is alive and well, and there are many, whether they're teachers, whether they're principals, whether they're academic regulators. We have the ecosystem fairly strongly in place. So what the changes that the new education policy is doing is about approach, the integration of vocational with regular education, making sports not extracurricular but making it curricular. These are innovations on how you can allow a child to pursue life choices that are not constrained to be only in one direction and in a sense one type. So I think the innovation and the ideation is about how to provide, how to give children today of this age and in the internet's age, whose aspirations are so different, allowing them to study and continue to be student and grow and thrive. Even if you want to be just be a YouTuber in the end of the day and create content, but you still go through a process where you learn life skills and the other skills that are required for you to be successful in life. And that, I think, is the focus. There are many things that we are doing in the skilling ministry. For example, bringing in more and more of the traditional skills of this country. And this country has a history of thousands of years of traditional skills, whether they are in metal, stone, wood, we refer to them as handicraft, we refer to them as many other things. But there are traditional skill clusters and traditional communities across the country that have had skills handed down from generation to generation. How do we bring that into the mainstream, not just to expand that community skills and upskill them, but also allow that skill to be transferred to other communities and other groups of people who want to learn that. So there is a focus, for example, on traditional and heritage skills, which has been outside the radar so far, but to formally focus on that and allow opportunities of reskilling and upskilling there as well.
There is, of course, that sounds like a great initiative. So there's also a flip side to internet access, right? And this government has always been very focused on accountability. So when we talk about that, I mean, with the new intermediary guidelines and digital code of ethics, so what kind of an impact are we looking at when it comes to different, whether it's intermediary players or whether we're talking about publishers, etc.?
No, the Honorable Prime Minister's vision of the internet as something that empowers every citizen comes with a flip side requirement of the government to ensure that the internet is open, it is safe and trusted, and that the intermediaries who provide these services are accountable to the users. So in a nutshell, if you say, on one hand, it is our task as a government, as our mission as a government, to connect as many Indians as possible to the internet, give them internet access. It is also our mission to keep the internet open, safe and trusted, and accountable to the users. So there are these corresponding missions that we have, because if you have children online, we definitely don't want the Indian internet to be unsafe for them. If you have women and normal people going about their business trying to get public services, we don't want them to be exploited. We don't want scams online. And if there are people using a particular intermediary for their services, whether it's a social media intermediary or any other platform, we don't want them to, because they are big and powerful, ignore the users, and therefore we want a culture of accountability between the platform and the user. The intermediary guidelines are essentially about that. It is about creating user safety and accountability of the platforms to the user, and it is aimed at that, and those aspects will continue to strengthen and evolve, because we don't want at any stage, as these big platforms become bigger and there are new platforms coming in, that the user in India should ever feel unsafe, that the child in India should ever feel unsafe, the woman in India should never feel unsafe online. And that is something that we are very committed to, and there is zero tolerance on that aspect of safe and trusted and accountable internet.
How do you allay fears of censorship, sir? I mean, there's been a lot of concern that with such regulations, the government is trying to shut down content and access to certain kinds of content.
So Diksha, look, let me be clear. I use the word open, safe and trusted, and accountable in the same breath, and we are committed to, and the Prime Minister's track record on this, all the way from the time when the previous government wanted to give the regulation of the internet to the United Nations, and it was Prime Minister Narendra Modi who said no, it should remain open, it should be remain free of any government interference. We are committed to an open internet, so we do not want the state or indeed any powerful multinational company to control the internet, nor telcos to control the internet. So that's point number one. Number two, this issue of takedown. Diksha, I'm glad you asked this question, so because it's an opportunity for me to clarify. Every sovereign government has the right to direct takedowns of content that are illegal, wrong, and causes user harm. That is the specific reason that as the internet grows, there are elements in the internet that are growing that are illegal as well. Those are causing user harm. And we are not shy at all about keeping the internet safe. That is our mission, and therefore to keep the internet safe, the content has to be directed takedown, whether it's child sexual abuse, whether it is incitement, whether it's national security. These are things that we will do proactively. On the issue of censorship, there is absolutely no cause for anybody to be concerned about that, or is there any reason for anybody to fear that, because the Constitution of India, Diksha, guarantees under Article 14, 19 and 21, guarantees rights to the citizens of India that are embedded in our Constitution. And no government, no bureaucrat, no minister is ever going to be able to take that. And if it is tried to be taken away, as the UPA did during with the Section 66A, the courts will strike it down. So therefore, there is no fear on Article 19. Article 19 is guarantees free speech. As a matter of fact, we are concerned that some platforms, using their rules, infringe on the right to free speech of consumers. So we are very clear that the Article 19 right to free speech and Article 19 to the restrictions to the free speech, that is incitement and national security, those will be respected and those will be followed by everybody, including private platforms and everybody. So there is no censorship. The fear of censorship is not something that in a country where there is a written constitution that guarantees free speech as a right, that anybody needs to be concerned about. And more, I think this is a narrative that is peddled by some people to distract away from what our public policy direction is and what our public policy objectives are.
I believe that there is largely a sort of compliance with the guidelines in any case, and the points of contention have already been addressed. But sir, I must also ask that, there have been concerns that the government hasn't said who is this particular government authority that can allow takedowns. So we saw with the entire case when Rahul Gandhi's tweet was taken down over, revealing the victim's identity when it's a case of a child and a minor. So I'm just wondering that what kind of government agencies can ask any intermediary to remove content? I mean, is it everyone? Is it the local police station in Chandigarh? Or
so Diksha, let me say this, and I think I'm saying this first time publicly, that around the IT guidelines and the IT Act, there is, I think what you're alluding to is that there are some gray areas, yes, or there are some areas that need to be clarified.
Which I believe the ministry is also working on standard.
Yeah, so exactly. So we will create those guardrails, we will create those standard operating procedures, and we will release them to the public. This is an area, Diksha, that I want to tell you that the jurisprudence will evolve. The whole cyberspace is an area that all the world's governments are only now coming to term with in terms of the big power concentration, user rights, the technologies that are proliferating there, the bad, the good of the internet. When I started working on the internet many decades ago, before all of you were around, it was supposed to be a nice place for people to interact and communicate with each other. It was an enabler of connectivity and enabler for communication. The internet in 2021 is a collection of very good things and some very bad things. So there is a need for us to be aware of all that, and the law will evolve. We are at today a certain thinking in terms of what the law is and what the challenges are, and over the years this jurisprudence will evolve. So and the ministry and the government will continuously go out there and create clarifications when clarifications are necessary. We call them guardrails, you can call them standard operating procedure. There will be no need for people to be concerned that we don't know this or we don't know that. We will be proactive on that.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and this very insightful conversation. I'm sure that the digital initiatives in India will continue to grow, especially with you at the helm of things right now. Thank you again for joining us at Hindustan Times at the SmarterEd Lenovo Tech Conclave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the inaugural virtual edition of the Hindustan Times presents Lenovo SmarterEd Conclave. And the theme of this conclave is New Order of Education. Lenovo SmarterEd Education Conclave will bring together leaders, policymakers, educators, and industry experts to drive conversations around the digital divide in education in India. We shall also speak about the tech advancements, development in education, reskilling and upskilling the educator workforce, and other challenges. Besides, we shall also be presenting platforms aimed at solutions and encourage interaction with tech decision makers across K-12 and higher education sector. In this session of the conclave, we are going to talk about digital divide and inequality in the education sector and how to bridge it. And we shall also touch upon the collaboration that the government, industry, and academic world can forge for better education outcome. Today, we have with us three gentlemen. They are well known in their own space. And we have with us Narayanan Ramaswamy, the National Leader of Education and Skill Development at KPMG India. We have with us Stuart King, the General Manager and Global Head of Education Systems and Solutions at Lenovo ROW. And we have with us Anshul Sonak, who is the Principal Engineer and Global Director, Digital Readiness Programs, Global Government Affairs Group at Intel Incorporation. Welcome all of you gentlemen to this edition of the conclave and to this session. Before I go, I just want to give a context to what we are saying, why we are talking about the digital divide. All of you gentlemen know that in last 18 years, education in India and elsewhere has got disrupted. Most of the campuses closed down, our houses become schools and colleges, our living rooms become the classroom, and technology become the ubiquitous instrument to continue our education delivery in learning, teaching, and everything. So my first question to Stuart. Stuart, you are in Singapore. How do you see the education disruption happening in Singapore and elsewhere? And how do you look at the Indian context as well, looking at India is a huge education market from a company's point of view, from a student's point of view, and from education players' point of view as well.
Got it. Thanks, Prashant, for the introduction. Very, very broad topic to start off with. So thank you. With that, I will try to manage my thoughts through here. So I guess the first step as any kind of successful technology company or any company would be to listen and respond to customer feedback as required. Now, Lenovo does this, as a business as usual practice. Now, the last couple of years has been a very accelerated adaptation from both the issues that our customers have raised across the board and specifically in education, to your point earlier, and how we could quickly respond to what has been a critical requirement in that space. I think the key for as you mentioned at the top, was the ability for educators to continue educating when the children and the students couldn't go to school because of multiple different lockdowns. India had lockdowns, Singapore, Australia, my other home had lockdowns, US and all through Europe. So actually all of a sudden, the whole world was, I wouldn't say in the same boat with COVID, but we were all weathering the same storm, one way or another. Now, throughout different geographies around the world, there was some difference of approach. Singapore, look, it's one of the most connected markets in the world, with gigabit, basically to 100% of homes and institutions around the country. However, in my other home, Australia, that's not the case. Whereas the more rural and the more remote you get from the larger cities, the lesser the coverage is. And to some instances, there's still no coverage in the more remote areas in Australia. So getting back around to your question, as to, setting this up, I would see India as, somewhere between Singapore and Australia, right? In terms of, the size and the scale and the coverage of particularly the connectivity that is around the country there. But the volumes of students is at a scale that is basically second, I think, only to China at the moment. And the only other point that I would make here is that India has the youngest population on the planet at the moment. So adding all of these things up, the quick response to the COVID situation that we've seen around the world, the first wave was simply getting technology in as many hands as we could, and that almost broke supply chains across the world. And actually, we're still seeing those in all areas of our supply chain management at the moment. However, we see now the initial couple of waves easing up, where we've got a lot more technology in hands. But the next phase is, okay, we're likely to see ongoing lockdowns as, you know, Delta variant or Mu variant or whatever the next variant is might be rolling through our respective markets, and we'll need to run a hybrid education model. You know, maybe some are back in class, maybe some are at home, maybe that's the way it's going to be. So connectivity is going to be absolutely critical there between the classroom and home. And I would say all stakeholders have a role to play in that. I mean, Lenovo is a stakeholder, you know, Intel is a stakeholder, of course, but also telcos. And, you know, in some instances, maybe, you know, radio and even television networks play a role to get the content out to schools. So I'll pause there. That was a very long answer. My apologies, but I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Stuart. Let me go to Anshul. Anshul, I think Stuart has talked about the digital divide, and digital divide is real across geographies and economies. What should the next phase be? How to bridge this digital divide, especially in the education sector, knowing that education is a big market, just not in India, elsewhere as well. Australia, it is one of the export, this is one of the top 3 export markets. How to, let me just cut short the question, how to bridge the digital divide and make this disruption a positive thing than a negative thing?
So that's a great question. I would probably first start with that word itself, digital divide, and what it means for education. If you can pause and really reflect, do we have to worry about a digital divide, or we have to worry about a learning crisis or a learning divide first? I mean, to me, the learning crisis or a learning divide is more important than just the digital divide. Digital is a tool towards learning outcomes. And especially, I mean, as an Indian, I can give you an Indian context, and globally, the learning crisis is very well documented last 2 years. I was just going through this research whereby the learning crisis in India has created a 4-year learning gap. And so a grade 3 student who get into COVID times in 2019, now that student is in grade 5, but because of this divide, he is learning grade 1 thing. He can't even do the proper reading for grade 1. So the learning divide has actually accelerated. The learning crisis, there is a volume. I mean, around the world, there's an estimation that more than 1 billion people have suffered because of this. So there's a volume issue, but what is more worrying in this is the value issue, right? 4 years of a learning gap is too much, right? Now, if you take that perspective, that a grade 3 student who's now in grade 5, but is still not able to master the skill of grade 1, what does it mean for economies? What does it mean for businesses? What does it mean for governments? And that is where, to your question, right? The importance of governments and academia and businesses coming together and really take it as a learning crisis of the whole generation. It has to be done in a far more mission mode basis. You cannot leave this on one stakeholder saying that, okay, it's just a teacher problem, or it's just an individual school problem, or connectivity not there, or device is not there, access is not there. We have been talking about the same things in Indian context and to some extent around the world for last 20 years. Digital divide is not a new topic, as we all know. But learning crisis for this generation and what will be the cost to it, economically and sociologically, is a very big issue. I mean, to me, a 4 year of a learning gap just in this is going to hurt economies, because we know economically every single additional year in the national average adds to the country GDP tangibly. So we really require a very different mode of a mission mode thinking now, right? If you have to address this mission, this whole learning divide. Then if you go into the next part, okay, what can digital play a role in this, right? Now, of course, we know digital can play a very, very big enablement role as a support to teachers, as a support to school leaders, support to parents. What do you want to learn? How do you want to learn? When do you want to learn? Where do you want to learn? All these big W questions, digital can help. But my request would be the stakeholders should not just think about this as only as a digital divide, really take it as a learning divide, learning crisis for a whole generation. We have a much bigger problem otherwise ahead of us.
Thank you for putting this into context. I'll take what you said and let me put this to Mr. Ramaswamy. There is a huge accumulation of learning loss. And where is the accumulation of learning loss, it leads to productivity loss, it leads to lack of job readiness, and it impacts the economy in the long run. It also impacts the earning capacity of individuals. Mr. Ramaswamy, how do you see this? In India, we have a productivity issue. Traditionally, we have a productivity issue. Now we have a learning crisis at hand. We have now everybody is talking, and so let's touched upon the issue, an accumulation of poor learning or learning crisis. How to deal with it, both in the primary, the elementary level, the secondary level, and the tertiary level, because we have a huge ecosystem, and in every stage of it, we have faced a tough time. As Anshul said, it's a learning crisis. How to deal with it, sir, in Indian context?
Yeah. So thank you, Prashant. Thanks for inviting me, as well as thanks for such a important that we should debate and with such a wonderful panelist. So I will start by commenting what Anshul just said. See, there are normally we look at three aspects of learning: equity, reach, and quality. Right? What digital does is the reach part of it. It bridges very well. Right? Wherever you are, it will bridge the reach part of it. You can reach. You can be in rural India. You can be in the kitchen. You can be traveling. Reach is done. But there are two other aspects that makes it difficult, which is the equity part and the quality part. So Anshul touched upon the quality part. I'll come to that a little later, which is very important. Even the equity part is a big question mark. Digital has actually accentuated the haves and have-nots in a big way. Those who have access to digital content, and maybe through the digital devices and the connectivity and other things, have a different learning path compared to those who don't have access to it. And in a country like India, as you know, wealth is not equally distributed. Now, learning is also not equally distributed. There are haves and have-nots. There are some who have bridged the divide that Anshul mentioned very well, and those who have not bridged. And those who have bridged also have not bridged it, as much as they would have in a normal sense, but at least they had something. But there are others who have not been to school for 2 years now. And look at, it's not just the learning gap. They'll have to pick up the habit of learning. It's going to be a much longer, arduous journey for them. But then coming to the quality part, where we are talking about, whether the learning is actually, giving what it is intended to. Like if you are a learner, you are supposed, there is an expectation globally and otherwise that the learner would know certain things. And there are various studies that puts India behind, even before all this COVID and other things happened, as to what we are learning is not up to the mark. And hence this COVID has only accentuated that as well. So our learning outcomes is a cause of concern, COVID, digital or otherwise. Now what digital has done, because it has brought in efficiency, the gap is also widening. What happens when you put a lot of technology where efficiency increases, and hence those who have not been up to the mark are pushed further backwards. So I'll tell you, you asked about how the industry is ready. Like, let me come to industry in some sense. If I can take a view, is so isolated from the academic world, they just don't care. Because they have their own means of picking up the right set of people, training them. Even before, it's not as if industry was dependent on the academic world to get their best people. They just chose the best ones amongst who was available and then put their own system to get them ready. So it's not so much the industry worried about what will happen. It's more the human resources that are available for industry and otherwise that is a cause of concern. And this, there are many, on a lighter sense, people talk about COVID batches. There are a lot of jokes going around saying, are you a COVID batch? Which essentially means you're a notch lower than your previous batches. It's partly true because the exposure that the student would have had is much lesser. Digital plays, in my view, a vital role in bridging this gap, provided people have access to it. And let me put it this way, in the quality side, just to take one or two steps, expanding what Anshul said. Quality aspect of it and where digital can play a role is across the value chain. Like for example, we talk a lot about content. Content is available everywhere because of digital. But has the curriculum changed? Because now we have digital mode. We talked about flipped classrooms. We talked about different means of reorienting curriculum, which has not happened in many cases, definitely not in India. We're talking about pedagogy. We're talking about digital classroom, phygital classrooms, or hybrid. Are we ready for some of those things? We're talking about teachers who are such an essential part. Are they really trained to teach in a forum where there are digital means of doing it? They are no more the knowledge holders. Knowledge is elsewhere. And their role now becomes a facilitator in a different forum. We coined a term called edupreneur for them. They are almost like an entrepreneur in the education world, training people to do more things. And assessment, we're talking about proctoring, we're talking about too many things which is unclear and we don't know, but digital is entering into the assessment domain in a big way. And administration, with data availability, the way we manage our primary, secondary, tertiary schools is going to be very different. So all I'm saying is, while digital has come into the education world, thanks to COVID-19 and associated lockdown, it has accelerated, it has hastened, we are not ready. So there's no, it's not correct to blame the digital world. It is the education world, in my view, is not ready to reap the benefits of what the digital technologies can bring in. And to that extent, more than industry, I think the academia now should be gearing up. They need to run faster to make sure that they harness all the benefits that could come of the digital technologies that has come into them.
Fantastic. I think you have given what the ground reality is we are in, and especially the India context. Let me take what you said and ask this question to Stuart. You have a problem of plenty. You are getting good students to choose from, but are you forgetting the bigger ecosystem, the bigger sector, so that you can work with them, improve them, and they become part of the mainstream rather than they remain in silos, and you continue to choose and pick the best from the lot available. Why I'm asking this is, no technology business right now can perhaps ignore the sector, education sector. It's a huge sector for companies as well. So are you going to play a big role in improving the ecosystem rather than choose and pick the best and be happy in your offices, sir?
I just wanted to make sure I understand the question. Are you suggesting that, as part of our graduate program, etc., when Lenovo or basically any company goes and selects, fresh grads, etc., we'll always be looking for those, top students? Is that the question? And then how are we addressing the broader population?
Yes.
Okay, got it. So I would rather just focus on how we address the broader population, but I would also then start with, hey, any corporate, anyone who's on here, Intel, KPMG, Lenovo, anyone else, is always going to go and try to recruit the best and brightest. It's human nature. Now, best and brightest today, I think, is significantly better and brighter than it was 10 years or even 20 years ago, simply because of the evolution of education, right? Education is smartifying the planet, essentially. So I would say that's that practice of selecting best and brightest will continue. It's a kind of a natural run of things. Now, if we look at the broader base, not everybody wants to work for a tech giant. There's kids that are growing up today that and they want to they've got different ideas of where their careers might go and where they want to go. But it almost certainly, these days, even if you're a rural farmer, technology plays a role. It will definitely play a role today, and it will continue to be more pervasive downstream. So the step one of this is getting this element of digitization and getting people used to digital everything, to get folks comfortable with doing things online, etc. And I think we're making leaps and bounds, and it's happening very quickly. But if we look at it, I think education, if you compare it, this is a global statement here, we're grossly underutilized. So there's probably less than 4% of the global education expenditure spent on digitization. This is from a Holon IQ report there. So, you know, things like labor, physical equipment, analog equipment, buildings, real estate, utilities, all of these things go into the non-digitization. And that's around a $6.2 trillion spend globally. Whereas the digitization is still a big number. It's around 227 billion globally, right? And that's around the hardware, software, and then all of the technology services that wrap around, you know, the sector there. So we expect to see that grow, and COVID has been a great wake-up call, right? If I can say, for educators around the world that all of a sudden sat up and had absolutely no plan B. Kids will get up in the morning and they will come to school and they will do their schooling and then they will go home. That was their plan A through plan Z. So COVID came along and shook that up. So we saw, I mentioned the massive demand around the increase in platforms, in getting devices in hands of kids throughout the world last year. And it is continuing depending upon where we sit in the world today and the state of COVID and maturity in those markets. So I think that's step one. People are getting used to using a keyboard, an input device, you know, a smartphone, a tablet, whatever it might be. Kids are growing up with this. And I think all you need to do these days is 9 times out of 10, go to anywhere, a restaurant as an example, and you'll see a family having a meal and not talking to each other, right? Dad's on his phone, mum's on their phone, kids watching something on iPad. It's just happening. Now, I won't say that's necessarily a positive part, but it's certainly part of, you know, content infusion that we're going through at the moment. So the next little while, and I think the next point we'd need to look at is, you know, the investment that will go into education sector over the next, look, let's just try to keep it relevant, maybe the next 5 years, right? That's maybe a relevant horizon for us to look at. And we're looking to almost double from the 227 I just mentioned up to around 404 billion in 2025. And interestingly enough, India is the fastest growing globally in that space. Not only the third largest by 2025, India will be growing 4x from 2015 to 2025. 2015 to 2020, they grew 4x and will continue out to 2025. So I think there is a lot of focus that's coming into the education sector, both from, you know, of course, external, you know, third party, you know, private sector. We have a role to play. Government has a role to play, and I know we've seen very large government investments, Andhra Pradesh governments, and of course ELCOT, you know, one of the largest, you know, rollout programs seen around the world. And India does this better than anyone else. But that said, I think we're still scratching the tip of the iceberg at the moment, and there's still a lot more to be done in India to continue to build this up. But I will say, getting hands on devices, step one, wrapping around with the rich, robust education enablement, software, etc., and then making it affordable, because that's also very, very tricky, right? As to how do we manage all of these things, you know. Let's say a $300, you know, tablet, you know, in America is considered affordable, right? Now, if you go, you know, up country India, that $300 is like, hey, that's unthinkable, right? So what else can we do? Lenovo also has its mobile phone business, so we've got, you know, its Android business, and that can also get us down into an area price point, you know, sub $100 in some instances, that will still get screens in hands. And with the ecosystem that Chrome is enabling these days, that can also flow down to Android, there are ways that, you know, we could reach down to those areas as well. So I think there's a number of ways. I mean, I'm coming at it more from a device perspective. Of course, that's my background. But I will also pause and say, my father was a teacher, and my daughter is also a teacher. And I'm trying to tell a little bit of a story in a very short amount of time. When I was a young technology salesman in education, I was pitching to my father, right, about, digital whiteboards. These were these fantastic newfangled things. You could write on them. You could do all these kind of things on them. And then you could print it out at the end of the lesson, and you could hand all the notes to the students. And it was groundbreaking at the time. And I couldn't understand why it wasn't more popular or more well received. And, at the end of my excellent pitch, it was the best pitch I've ever done, to my dad. My dad said, sorry, Australian accent here, mate, I've never had a blackboard failure. And what he was saying, I don't want technology in the classroom because, if that goes down, then I lose all of my train of thought. Now, fast forward, however many years, 10, 15, 20 years later, my daughter's finishing and she's actually in placement this week, her first placement in school. And she's grown up, and her first placement is COVID. She's doing it remotely, similar to how we are here today. And I've said, so how are you finding, doing this, remotely? And, she's just loving it, right? I mean, she's grown up with tablets and screens and stuff like that. So her ability to connect to the camera and still deliver a rich, learning experience to the students is groundbreaking, compared to the legacy of, my father's generation, right, that we just didn't want any technology. So I think we're probably in the mix somewhere, right, depending upon, age and digital comfort of teachers, because we know for sure the kids are getting comfortable with technology, and there's going to be that gap. The students are going to push the teachers, and the teachers have to respond. So there needs to be an investment within the education section to upskill teachers to enable them to be as comfortable with technology as kids are.
Thank you, Stuart. Anshul, with the kind of growth that Stuart has underlined, the Indian market or any other education market that is going to see over the next 5 years, do you see education as a vertical in IT companies like yours is going to shift from an ancillary role to a mainstream role? Do you see that IT education is going to be a mainstream vertical in IT companies like yours, and they will play a much more active role than a supportive role that the companies used to play, let's 10 years back or 5 years back?
So there are many ways to answer that, but straight ways, companies themselves need talent, and the cost to acquire talent and then cost to really retrain talent, right, is a big cost at the end of the day. Purely from an economic standpoint, it makes sense that you really invest in education industry and education stakeholders with the government and academia, and get talent of the country ready for not just your competitiveness and country competitiveness, but for the whole industry ecosystem growth, because then you are expanding the pie. So those companies who understand that, who have a long-term view like that, will definitely do what you are saying, right? Really put education as a mainstream integral part of the business, whichever businesses you may be doing, right? It doesn't have to be a separate P&L. There are many ways to structure it, right? As long as it's mainstream in your whole company-wide DNA. And again, I'll give you this a very simple couple of examples. I was going through a conversation with people in Infosys, and I was told that their annual cost to retrain employees when they hire an engineer, right? And you know how many engineers are non-employable in India, right? That's a whole different argument, right? And then a company like Infosys has to pay like almost $500 million to just retrain over a period of 8 to 9 months. Now imagine a portion of that money goes out and you actually get a better quality talent so that you don't have to spend that kind of money here. So that is one side of an economic argument where it makes sense, right? The other side of an economic argument, which one has to think from a company standpoint, and we as a high-tech company really go through this conversation internally. This is to support your point, by the way, right? So country like India, which is very strong in STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths, right? Students go to IITs and then students go abroad for the higher education, right? And then go and take a job abroad. And then a company like Intel, who's wanting to hire 15,000 engineers, masters and PhDs in Hyderabad and Bangalore and Chennai, and we don't get that kind of a quality over there ourselves, then what do? We try to bring those guys back who have gone to US or wherever else in the world, right? As an Intel employee working over there. The cost to bring them back is an enormous cost on the company. So it probably makes far more sense if we, instead of just relying on that model, we explain it to the academia and civil society and government and work together to overall improve the quality of talent and also provide local opportunities with the same kind of a competitive environment, right? Because ultimately the younger talent require a better problem solving opportunity, younger talent want a growth opportunity. So companies can definitely provide that if they really structure it very well inside, rather than only looking at education as a cost hit, as a retraining or a training, as a training wing under sitting under HR and all that. And you will find again many models in this. I mean, companies like Intel has a chief learning officer whose whole mandate is to really get a very comprehensive view on this and really provide a board level strategic recommendation. So that is like a one big thing here. The second big thing which I would just place here is today's talent and across education, right? It's not about only the access and inclusion issues, as we know. The skills and the content is getting democratized with internet and all that, right? But people ability to trust on that. So skill plus trust, or especially with all the new technologies we are talking like artificial intelligence and stuff like that. And then the meaningful, responsible usage part, right? Across the industries, depending on whichever or the job market or whichever is a focus industry for a state, right? So you may have a different answer for that for, let's say, Himachal Pradesh, which may be talking of, or Uttaranchal, which may be talking of a tourism and service industry, vis-a-vis, let's say, Tamil Nadu, which may be talking of an automobile industry as an example, right? So skill plus trust plus responsible use for the local innovation, local hyper innovation ecosystem creation, right? That is an important part, which is what we call as a digital readiness, right? So digital readiness is not just digital inclusion or digital access or digital equity, which is absolutely foundational, but going beyond that and really address the skill plus trust plus the broader responsible usage for local innovation, which is where the job will be created, which is where the growth will come. So that is a view which companies can do far better if they understand this game. The third point, to support your thing, is eventually it will boil down to the mindsets. And earlier speakers talked about teachers and all that, right? No amount of technology investment alone is going to solve this issue. Stuart gave an excellent example of his father versus his daughter, right? So you have to show what is changing. It's a cultural thing. You have to show and you have to steer the change. And it's a mindset change. And that is never going to be easy. That is going to take time. Now, how can you do that? You have to really build local successes, micro level, small proof point. Any success, if it has to sustain over a period of time, it has to be locally owned. It cannot be just top-down policy or this industry or that academy are doing, right? So unless you create that micro communities of practice or micro ownership at a grassroots level, that every job will become digital job as we go. We know that, right? I mean, World Economic Forum Future of Job report, the argument is very clear. 85 million jobs will disappear, 95 million jobs come up. The net job addition is happening because of technology. So there's no choice. And within that no choice argument, how do I make sure that my daughter, like how Stu gave an example, right? Everybody start thinking like that and create a different mindset. That will really make a change. So it's not just about a skill set. It's definitely not about tool set. I mean, the tool set part, the digital part is probably the easiest part to handle. The skill set part is where the academy and government needs to come together. But the mindset part is where we probably need a much more serious thinking at a country level if we have to really retain the national competitive advantage. If not, just to make a last point on this, I mean, I manage a global artificial intelligence program for education. So I can give you statistically what's going on right now from an Indian context, right? One robot or one AI application, right, can replace 500 jobs. I mean, across industry. I mean, Yatra.com, if you really study the model, what happened to their back-end office is a classical example, right? I was going through one of this NASSCOM report earlier that India every day, because of our earlier focus on only coding and programming and not really moving up the value chain towards low code, no code, and AI and machine learning and some of these newer emerging skills, India every day is losing almost 600 jobs to machine learning, deep learning algorithms, right? So this will really have a serious repercussion on the country's economy. And I come from an extremely lower middle class background in rural Maharashtra. So in my culture over there, the entire focus was get the student out of a school, put him into an engineering, let him do whatever engineering, civil, mechanical, I don't care, as long as he get a job into a coding programming in Wipro, Infosys, TCS. And then that's my retirement passport. Parents also need to change that mindset, because the whole old model of learn to work is gone. School, college, degree 1, degree 2, and then 1 job, 2 job, those days are gone. It will be work to learn, not to learn to work. Lifelong continuous learning. Today we are talking of in a 40-year of career, maybe 4 or 5 career streams, maybe 10 to 12 jobs. So there is no choice but to continuously relearn. You can't think like my investment done with on my kid, son and daughter, right? And then that will take through for the next 40 years or 50 years. So learn to work model is dead, actually speaking.
Anshul, I think very interesting points, good insights, and some red flags for all of us to look at, to ponder. Mr. Ramaswamy, looking at what Anshul said and the kind of red flags he talked about, the amount of job loss happening, amount learning continuously, and you also touched upon earlier that how academicians should speed up to catch up. What should the academic world in India should do to catch up what is happening in India because of the COVID, and what is happening in the job market, and what is happening in the global perspective? Because we are no more a Delhi kind of country or a Bombay kind of country. We are a country where everybody is interlinked. We are now talking to Stuart and Anshul who are not in India. So how do you look at it? How should the Indian academic world should catch up? There's perhaps a missing bus, a speeding bus.
Okay. So I understand this question in the context of here is the world, the industry, and the job market in general, which is going on in some pace, and should the academic world do something to catch up with them? Because today people have this, almost like I would call it mindset, where when you are young, you are getting into learning, and once you learn, you get into the job market, and like Anshul rightly said, after that learning is over. And we have heard many people say, I've done with my learning, now I'm getting into working, and then I retire and I do whatever. So that, that process, in my view, and like Anshul rightly put, is gone. I don't think we can ever say that I have learned and that is it. Just a little contrary to what you just mentioned, I don't think the academic world should catch up. In fact, the academic world should start defining what needs to be done. Because originally, at least universities, if not schools, were supposed to be places where original thinking happened. That is where people have been shaped up to actually take up a center stage. If there is some place where people who were learners have started to become original thinkers, that's because each university had a life, and it also had a character because of which people from that university were looked at in a certain manner and things like that. Now what is happening? Either the universities have become training grounds for industry, or worse still, in some places it is just a place where people stay to get their degrees. What difference has the university made to the life of youngsters for the 3-4 years that they have spent there? Now, earlier, or when I say earlier, in the past 10-20 years, it could be earning a specific skill, getting a particular skill. It could be coding, it could be automobile engineering, it could be something. Now, again, I agree completely with what Anshul said. That may not be the case. If I'm trained for a specific skill and I get into the job market, it vanishes after 6 months. So whatever I've learned is perhaps not useless, is perhaps not useful, After that 6 months, 1 year, if you are lucky, it will take you to 2-3 years. Whereas when I was doing my engineering, I was sure that for the next 20 years I've learned, and that will take me. That is rapidly vanishing. So I would look at the role of educational institutions as someone who is going to be continuously involved in the growth, in the betterment of people till perhaps they die. I'm now looking at many of these schools, colleges, universities looking at perpetual enrollment, particularly the higher education institutions. The schools at least can say, my primary learning is over, I hand over to secondary learning. My secondary learning is over, I hand over to tertiary learning. I don't think the tertiary learning guys can say my role is over ever. So I look at the learning institutions to play a much larger role, not just in defining the person, but also defining the career of people much beyond what is called as the entry level. So I would think the change has to be a lot more significant and fundamental for those who are in educational institutions. They should start looking at, is my purpose changing? And it is. And hence, how should I reorient myself? Earlier, I was teaching them. Now I am actually teaching them how to learn. I'm not teaching them anything specific, but I'm just telling them, when you go into this world, you should start learning more, and I will teach you how to learn, or I will teach you how to adjust yourself or prepare yourself for something that is going to happen. You're not preparing yourself in the university. I'm helping you that as an individual that you're, and those who do it well are the ones who will be successful. So the universities are no more places where you learn something specific, but universities are going to be places where you learn how to learn. And to that extent, they should also not be the holders of knowledge, but they should be facilitators of how knowledge can be got. Because earlier, it was a finite kind of place. I mean, there were specific books, there were specific portals of the year where you get. And now learning can come from anywhere. Things are changing so dramatically. For for the jobs that are being created, there is no learning that can happen in the universities of today. So I would think there is a fundamental disruption that has happened to what should be the role of particularly universities. And that has an impact on the primary, secondary, that is the school education as well, but significantly so in universities, where they should relook at the role they play and the way they shape individuals who are these young adults who are going to be perpetual learners. So that's the way I look at it. And hence the role of universities is not so much of catch-up, but some place where they actually are the ones who create a platform for people for their life.
Fair point. So we talked about the school system, we talked about the higher education system. Another sector that is growing faster in this country is the EdTech sector. They are the supplementary education providers. Can I ask Stuart, how do you look at this sector in India? Because this is getting a huge amount of investment from Indian PE VC funds, from global VC funds. The valuation is skyrocketing. How do you look at the EdTech segment? How do you look at some of these companies who have actually become too huge to be talked just not in India, but outside as well?
Yes, the investment in EdTech is an area that's expanded dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years. Around $4 billion in 2015, sitting at around 16 billion globally in 2020. And still, to be honest, I think we're still scratching the surface in all fairness here. So in the India context, I mean, India is the third largest, if that's the right word, on the investment in EdTech, coming in at around $4 billion annually last year, and it has grown very dramatically, very, very quickly. So we believe this is going to continue to grow. Simply, I think, as all of the other panelists have also mentioned, I mean, we've been focusing very much on the early life cycle of students, and I 100% agree with Narayanan on the, primary it has a start and a finite finish date, and secondary has a start and a finish date, but tertiary now is forever, and I think we're educating children now for jobs that we can't even imagine, right, for when they graduate. So I think there's so much unknown. Now, the key to that as to how we can continue that lifelong learning is going to be around the investment in education technology, and from what we're seeing in India, just given the scale and the use of the country, and it's certainly becoming one of the most digitally aware economies in the world, that things are certainly shaping up for a very bright future in India. Now, I did mention that India was number 3. To put that in perspective, we have China that is the largest, which probably no surprises there, and then USA coming in at around 13 billion a year. So, there's still certainly headway to grow there, but to also look other perspective, Europe is only $2 billion of education tech investment. So it's about half of what India is presently. So it's very interesting to see over the last 5 years how things have changed. America has more or less stayed the same. China has dramatically grown, as one would expect, but India has grown as a percentage the greatest. So we, thrilled to see that investment, and it obviously needs to continue to grow as the population continues to grow and educate themselves.
That's good. Thank you so for this. I'm going to Ansul and will ask him to give me a very brief kind of answer. What is the future of the education right now, looking at the disruption? And what role you are part of the global government affairs team? So what role and what the government is talking about it, how the government is perceiving this change? And number one, what is the future? Number two, how the government is perceiving this?
Okay, so future of education, as I said in my earlier commentary also, we are seeing this reversal of model from older learn to work to this new work to learn. So basically this means education should not be thinking about it as a point progression, but a continuously learning cycle or a lifelong learning culture, lifelong learning mindset. And hence the policies also have to be changed. And earlier speaker also made that point. The role of universities is not a knowledge giver now, but a lifelong learning enabler, right? So this is where governments have to really foster a deeper trusted human capital relationship on how can I make everybody really a lifelong learner, what kind of policies are required, what kind of infrastructure required. And I mean, since I'm sitting in Singapore, I can give you a Singapore example. Ministry of Skill Future, the way they kind of target lifelong learning is a global, well-known case study, right? So that is where the government also have to shift. It's not about just the output of how many, the metrics which we used to have. What's the percent of student completing from school to college, college to job? I think those matrices are all older matrices. So any national planning agendas and the planning teams at a government level have to have a very different matrices now. Okay, how am I continuously reskilling? And within that, in the spirit of inclusion and equity conversation, you have pockets. So US, for example, we do this conversation, US and Japan, women lost more jobs than men in COVID, just in 2020, right? Robotics, so double disruption, COVID and AI, right, and technology have created a double disruption, which is impacting more women than men. It's a known argument. Now, do I create a lifelong learning program, holistic program for that kind of a target audience? So that is like one way of thinking about this, on how government should start focusing the thinking. And then, of course, from an overall policy standpoint, the basic education, K-12, higher education, vocational education, that's not going to disappear. That will only get augmented. But as Narayan also earlier said, the half-life of content is shrinking so fast, right? The whole academic mindset that I am the king on the content and I know the best in terms of content and delivery, that needs to totally change. You need a whole new model of industry academia partnership, entrepreneurship, practical training, technical confidence building, all this, right? And that will probably require a whole new ways to organize university as a lifelong learning enabler, whereby students can go in, go out, do some simulated trainings in place X, parallelly work with Professor Y, go and complete degrees as per agile need of the industry. I think that those industries and universities who can configure that way agile will be able to attract big industry investments faster. And we have some examples around the world in any case. I mean Intel is a classical example whereby if we have to go into a country and put up a factory over there, how do I get 1,000 PhDs and masters? There is no way we can get it, right? In a country like India. So you have to then really reinvent this whole lifelong learning with university.
Anshul, thank you so much. I think I must thank all the three speakers. I wish to continue this discussion, but I think we have exceeded the time by 1 minute. So I'll just let all of you go, but just want to make one final point that pre-COVID in education sector is not going to come back. It's a new world order. The future of education is certainly something different than what we have witnessed earlier. We have education technology players in our platform now who are telling us what exactly is happening on the ground and how things will change. And Mr. Ramaswamy said how universities can be the change makers than being catching up or be part of the catch-up game. So I think we have a whole lot of stuff in our hand, how we mold ourselves, our education sector, and how all the government, the corporates, the high-tech sector, and as well as the academia can come together and improve this sector very well. We look forward to talk to you in future, gentlemen. And thank you so much for your time. I think it's wonderful. I'm sure the people who are listening to this will be liking this. And we look forward to talk to you, keep touch with you, and learn more about you, and learn from you how we should move forward. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Prashant. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Anshul.
Welcome to the inaugural virtual edition of Hindustan Times presents Lenovo SmarterEd Conclave. The theme of this conclave this year is the new order of education. Lenovo SmarterEd Education Conclave will bring together leaders, policymakers, educators, and industry experts to drive conversation around the digital divide in education in India, tech advancement and development in education, reskilling, upskilling the education workforce as well. We shall also be presenting the platforms aimed at solutions and encourage interaction with tech decision makers across K-12 and higher education sector. Today, we are going to discuss in this session about the practice, the investment in the technology to reshape the education landscape in India. And we have with us three very distinguished speakers today. We have with us first Ashish Rajpal, who is the founder of Exceed. Ashish is a good voice and well-known voice in the school education sector. He left his corporate job to work in the education space. And he has a passion to talk about education sector, the school education, the teacher education. We have with us Dr. Prashant Bhalla. Dr. Bhalla is a second-generation education entrepreneur, and he is also the president of Manav Rachna Educational Institutions. He is also the head of ASSOCHAM's Education Councils. Third, we have Dr. Gurinder Singh. He is the Group Vice Chancellor of Amity Universities, and is also the Director General of Amity Group of Institutions. Has a distinguished career as an academician, as a researcher. Welcome all of you, gentlemen. What we'll do in this session is, I'll start asking all of you in alternative way, and we'll continue with that. Let me start with Ashish Rajpal. Ashish, you have been working in the school sector. Recently, you bought a small stake in a preschool segment. We are in a pandemic year. How is the technology integration and technology adoption helping the school sector to perhaps deliver what it intends to do in the absence of physical campuses?
You know, Prashant, it's been a terrible 2 years because of COVID, and people have suffered a lot in many ways. Schools have suffered, children have suffered, parents have suffered. But I tell you, the one upside which we have seen, and we work with thousands of schools, is that the attitude towards technology has completely changed. And it's not an exaggeration. It's like night and day. As someone said, you went to sleep in 2019 and you woke up in 2030. Schools where we were begging teachers to use technology, to use something, even very basic things, and it was very troublesome to convince them, it has been a complete turnaround. And people have been asking us. One of the first things we did was to start running a seminar, just a free seminar for people, how to use basic things. What is Zoom? How do you log on? How do you run a class? How do you do a screen share? And so on and so forth. And in small towns of India, I mean, you know this perhaps too, that classes are running on WhatsApp. 9 months ago, school owners used to tell us that, things are very tough, life has come to a standstill, don't know when things will open, parents are not paying fee. Today, I think the sentiment has become different. People are like, I don't know when things will open, but life has to continue. And this is how it is continuing. Now we are learning from the schools. So I think from a slightly longer term perspective, there has been the biggest change I feel is not infrastructure, not the enormous amount of funding that is being raised in the name of edtech, but it is the mindset change that has happened in schools and teachers and colleges. I work with schools, so I know more about schools, which I think is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And that opportunity should not be lost for us as a people, as a country, because I think once things normalize, the tendency is to go back. So I think it's an amazing time, amazing time.
Interesting points. I think so. We slept in a previous era, and we woke up with the pandemic to near new realities. Very interesting point, and perhaps it has pushed us to accept technology as part of life. Let me go and ask Professor Singh. So you had one of the huge university cluster, to be honest. You also earlier you have spoken about how you work with the African e-network. Just tell me, given a background, this is for Professor Singh, how technology adoption had changed, let's say 2 years down from backward, and how technology adoption had changed now for you.
Thank you, Prashant. I think that technology was always a challenge in the higher education sector, whether it's India or it's abroad. You mentioned Pan-African e-network project. So I will take this as a case study. This was a dream project of Dr. Kalam, our very honorable president of India. And as you know, that he was very visionary. And I remember for the first time when he went to Africa, he took some of the academicians with him. And I remember speaking to him in with the African Union, where all the president and states were there. And his first sentence was that I am going to give Africa a gift, which they will remember for decades. So everyone clapped. But his next sentence was, but not $1 to give. So people were thinking that what he's going to give. And Dr. Kalam, a great visionary at that time, when internet was a challenge, when the people in Africa, they hardly had any clue that what is satellite education, what is technology, how to use it. He said that why not European Union, African Union, and India come together, and we should be able to educate thousands of African students. And I remember that at the end of the conclave, the conclusion was that European Union said that Africa was not ready. And it is going to take 2 years for them to prepare for the technology to be implemented. He came back and he invited all leading institutions, IITs, IIMs, we were also invited. And I remember in that meeting, 19 universities and top institutions. When this idea was floated, 17 said it's very difficult, very, very difficult. And at that time, I think that the idea which he gave was that if tomorrow you need to use technology and something happens, then how will you be able to transform it in a day? People were not able to understand it. Anyhow, this project took off. We became the partner to the Ministry of External Affairs, and it was implemented. The target which was given to us was 1,000 students. And Prashant, do you know that how many students joined this program? 80,000. So that is a power of technology. And we have seen in the COVID also that overnight we had to change, whether it was our institution or it was Manav Rachna or many others. That overnight the challenge for us was that we need to change. And we were able to do this because we were using technology. And I think in higher education, one of the most important thing is not only that you are using technology, but you are bringing best of the faculty from across the globe. So COVID has taught us many things. When one of the things is that it is bringing globe very closer. So in the last 1.5 years, we have seen that almost, I was just reading out before coming here, about 11,800 top faculty members, different institutions, Indian institutions were able to bring. Right? And if you look at the corresponding figures of the previous 10 years, it was less than 5,000. So what I think all the universities and institutions have been able to do in 1.5 years, they were not doing earlier in the last 5 to 10 years. So that is kind of change which we have been able to bring. But the question is that how will you teach where technology is not there in India? And I think that this is somewhere the question, and you started up with the social divide. I think that is very, very important.
Dr. Singh, I'll come back to the social divide. It's a very interesting point. Let me ask Dr. Balla this question. How can educators, Dr. Balla, education providers like you, education entrepreneurs like you, integrate technology in education to make digital learning effective? Because first in that case, there was a huge mindset issue earlier. How do you integrate technology in education? How do you make digital learning effective for students?
Thank you, Prashant. So I think as even the previous speakers talked about, if you look at way the whole education process was there or the education system was there, technology was being used. But I think these times, last 1.5, 2 years, have given us such a time which obviously we all had our own challenges, the personal issues that came up. But yeah, for us as educators, the biggest challenge was academic continuity. And that's where, like, as we heard the previous speakers, even the private universities, the government or the government universities, everybody came together in these times. And that was what was the major drive in terms of ensuring that first we have to see that our student, which is the core, shouldn't miss out on that particular purpose. And that's what the starting point. And we were also lucky enough to have that kind of support, the HR resources with us and the readiness that really helped us in ensuring that particular bit. The challenges were there, but I think it was about how you look at the challenge, and maybe that challenge turns into an opportunity. I think specifically at Manav Rachna, and we also have our Kunst Scholar Network. That's again one of the largest chain across the world of K-12 as well as in content development. So in this time, we were able to really build our competencies. We were already there in the content development space. We were providing those solutions to our students, and we were quite ready for this blended model of delivery. But I think that was a time when we really came forward, and we got into specifically, if I want to talk about one aspect, is the healthcare sector, where one of the flagship things that we were able to implement and help the government was the COVID vaccination training program. So this was one program which we have been able to take it to nearly now 30 countries, and it is impacting the life of millions. And that's one area we were able to support well. And other than that, obviously for our students, whether it is K-12 or higher education, and we had this venture already where the content was there for the vocational space also, so that we were able to implement across the country. We were able to support the NSDC partners, the skill development sector in a big way. And the healthcare part, as I was talking about, in association with the Association of Hospital Providers in the country and the Swedish healthcare providers. So this particular model which we were able to build, that was quite unique, and that was very much in need. And even along with that, some of the healthcare training programs which were also required for the support of these healthcare providers. So that was one area we were able to do. The challenges were there, but I think it was more about how everybody came together, whether it was the teachers, community, the administrators, the parents, and the students. I think all when they really came in and they really worked up on the challenge. And as was previously mentioned, that the learning is now coming from their experiences. And as they are experiencing more, and even I think if I look at maybe a 5th grader would be teaching our like teacher in the school. So that's the kind of learning that has come, and it has become more collaborative. The outcomes are definitely more defined. The results like are easy to look at, and that thing is something that really has helped us a lot. And I think these have been really challenging times, but I think for EdTech or for education sector, the most opportune time to really take a leap, and that most of them have really managed to do that.
Trubla, thank you so much. To be honest, basically, so the acceptance has improved tremendously, and the integration has also happened. Let me take these 2 points and ask Ashish. Ashish, you also talked about access and acceptance in the school space. You also have a little bit of presence in the preschool space as well because of your new staff. How can we increase penetration of digital technology, and how e-learning companies will shape the way for advanced learning, whether it is school, preschool, or the higher education segment?
So I think 2 parts to your question, and both are, I think, very genuine concerns. That how do you take it to sections of society where it is hardest to take it to, and how do you take it to the youngest children? I just want to kind of qualify my comments with, I'm a strong believer in the importance of physical space, in doing things with your hands and legs and feet, a constructivist at heart. So there is only so much that you can do over the internet, and there will always be the need for the physical aspect of education, which cannot be replaced. And I can say a lot about that. But coming back to your question, only surprises for me, Prashant. So let's start with little children. If you had asked me this question in February of 2020, that can you run online classes for 3-year-old children, I would have scoffed at it and given you a speech like what I was talking 2 minutes before. I have seen 40-minute classes run by our experts who themselves were terrified, to be honest, to say, how do you kind of motivate the mothers on the other side to sit for 40 minutes? What if the children lose interest completely? What will happen? Of course, many areas of concern, many areas of improvement. But if you know what you're doing, if the tasks are well chosen, if the activity is well chosen, if the text is well chosen, if the communication in advance to parents is given, it is possible to run some early childhood program online. I have seen it with my own eyes. Can you do it all the time? No. Are the ones who are coming from upper middle class and affluent homes at a better? Of course, without a doubt. But it is possible. It's possible over a mobile phone, over a WhatsApp-based lesson. So big surprises there. I think all of us will do well to keep an open mind in terms of what has happened on that count. Equally, I would say, at the cost of sounding overly optimistic, we work with schools which are in two-tier kind of places, and also with low fee, as we do with middle class and upper middle class schools. We see the penetration of technology has gone deeper, and some of the learning, as Prashant was, if I can call you Prashant, was mentioning, asynchronous, for instance. Our customers are teaching us how synchronous and asynchronous, that arguing with me that you don't need a live class in this case. I send the video lecture. I insist that the child sees it. And then my follow-up live class is only for 10 minutes because my children don't have bandwidth, there's connectivity issues, my teachers can only do for live and so on. So I think because the 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 rupee phone has penetrated far and wide, we are not talking about laptops, I'm not talking about tablets, I'm not talking about fancy infrastructure, I'm talking about basically the basic smartphone. A lot is happening. Now, there again, if there is support on the ground, makes a big difference. If there's training, if the mindset related issues, resources on the ground, makes a big difference.
And you see the e-learning players flourishing as well.
Oh, hugely. I mean, everybody's lost except them, right? who else is gained? Who else is gained? But don't provoke me too much on that topic, because I will have a lot to say.
I know we'll take that offline sometime.
But
Sure.
let me just say this, and I'll be candid with you, that all learning in the end should be assessed on moving the child from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Go ahead, raise the money. Go ahead, make lots of money. Do whatever. I mean, that's great. That's glorious. No problem with that. Where is the discussion of moving children from point A to point B? I think all discussion on technology should be in that context. But I'll wait for you to ask that question.
Absolutely. I think there's a fair point. As a lot of thing that you have spoken without uttering the words, as a fantastic point. So what I'm taking is, it's possible, and it's possible with it by applying a bit of your mind as well. Let me take this possibility part and ask a question to Professor Singh. Professor Singh, you have a huge setup in terms of number of students, institutions, university size, the reach in different states. What are the popular digital tools you are using for students, teachers, learners? Can you give some real life examples from your university, from your experience in last 1 year, and how that is helping the cause?
I think very good. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Prashant, for asking that question. As you know, that we are amongst the very few humble and top players of India who are into digital education, and our MBA has been very recently ranked as amongst the top 20 programs of the world by the QS ranking agency also. So we have been using technology in our all programs. What we have done is that we have now ventured into the new areas. For example, earlier we were only doing full-time programs, we were doing full-time degrees. But now if you look at the kind of programs we are offering, they are quite a new programs. For example, we have got a program of about 15 days on AI. We are doing very short duration program on blockchain. We are doing on data sciences. And what we have done is that we have tried to collaborate with some of the top players of the world. So have brought some of the foreign universities who were earlier very hesitant to come to India. For example, if you look at some of the top Ivy Leagues or Russell Group of universities, they always had a question that should they offer their degrees or their programs to Asian countries or to other countries. They never wanted to dilute their brand. So during COVID times, I think that most of the top universities, they have tried to collaborate with the like-minded universities. And I think that we were very fortunate that we were able to collaborate with them. So if you look at the kind of programs we are offering somewhere about 300 programs today. And different fields, little bit technology, little bit with the
intervene. So you're saying that international collaborations, delivery has all improved because of technology.
Absolutely.
And tell me what kind of LMS you are using? Is it very student friendly? Is it allowing to go for proctoring? Is it allowing to go for live classes? Is it allowing it to bring students who are not in Delhi, Noida, Gurgaon, or in bigger cities, sitting in somewhere downtown, smaller towns? Is it helping them? How are you integrating those students with your? So let me cut short myself.
Right.
What kind of LMS you are using to facilitate this learning across campuses?
Right. Well, and how is that? Yeah, thank you, Prashant. We are trying to use our own internal system. This is known as Amazon. So it's a wonderful tool which we have been able to develop over the years. We are sitting anywhere. So, for example, if I'm sitting in Noida today, I can go anywhere. From UK, you can attend a class. If you are in New York, you can attend a class. In Singapore campus, you can attend a class. And all of them, they can participate also on the same platform. But we do use Zoom, and we are using that platform also to deliver the classes. But I think that it's not about only one platform. You also need to see that how we are using various tools to see that learning is a continuous process. As an academician, I still feel that hybrid model is the best model. Because one of the challenges with students they are facing, whether they're in school, and I'm sure that my other speakers will agree, or they are in a university system, sitting in front of a computer for the whole day is not something which will give you that kind of experience. So we are trying to use technology in a way which is also giving you enjoying experience, which is where you can also do projects, where you can also have lab experience. And we still feel that there are issues. For example, that if you do some research on internet, you will find that on the scale of 10, 6.8, which is 68% of the students, they are facing some kind of mental issues.
Yeah,
these are the mental health issues which are very, very
very similar question before I go to Dr. Valla for the next set of questions. Do you see EdTech as a space going to get integrated with the mainstream? Because so far, pre-COVID, EdTech and mainstream education were working in silos. They are not part of each other largely. Do you see EdTech as a segment is now getting more mainstream, more accepted? And do you see, and the vice versa, but earlier EdTech guys used to think that perhaps we are different than the mainstream. Now perhaps they can't survive without mainstream. Do you see this integration happening as well?
Shanti, I think that one thing which we need to understand is that if you look at students today, sitting for about 1.5 years at home, they really want to understand that how they can have that kind of experience which universities, schools and colleges they used to offer. So I personally feel that the future of the education, even when we will be able to find the solutions to the problem of COVID, is going to be the hybrid model. We will be using technology, but along with technology, we need to ensure that students are able to mix up. They can play when they come to the universities. They can have friendships. They can have personal discussions. So I think technology is going to be very, very important, will play a very important role. But all can't be done with technology. Our own experience has been that university education or higher education system, and to some extent school education, is not only teaching in the class. We are strong believer that many things you are able to learn outside the class also.
Absolutely.
So it's not about lectures, it's about experience.
Absolutely. Let me ask, go to Dr. Valla. I think Dr. Valla, you are active in the policy space as well. You have met the education ministers over the years several times. You also work with the PSI as a umbrella body to talk about the betterment of institutions. How do you see this new education policy? Do you see this new education policy will take us to a new phase of education growth? Do you see any challenges in its implementation? Because at the end of the day, whatever the policy document says, it is the implementation which matters, and implementation will happen at your end, Dr. Valla, as an institution, as an entrepreneur. How do you see this?
So if we start with the process of this education policy coming in, I think it was initiated maybe 5.5, 6 years back, when the first process of engagement and interaction started. And it started with maybe one committee, went down to others. And I think this was one big exercise happening for the first time in our country, where like all stakeholders were really invited in terms of taking their views and coming out with a strategic document, definitely, which is a very, very well laid out document. It has covered all the spheres, all the expectations of all the stakeholders. And we were fortunate enough, like as this path started, starting from one HRD minister to second to third, when it eventually got announced and launched. So we were like continuously engaging with them, and to an extent that the then HRD minister was there at one of the SOCHM's forums when the education policy was supposedly to get launched. And I think some of the points that we raised at that particular point got raised on that forum itself, got incorporated in the final document. So that was the kind of thing, definitely in terms of engagement and in terms of involvement of stakeholders happened. When you talk about, definitely the expectations are that it is definitely going to take India to a different league for sure, in terms of if all the parameters and all the definitions that are expected really happen. So some of it are related to the regulatory environment, whether we talk about maybe dismantling the affiliating system, which has its own challenges, looking at becoming multidisciplinary institutions of delivery, which is more on the universities, In the K-12 space, the challenges are different, the targets are different. Like we are talking about achieving a GR of 50% by 2030. So there are all those thought processes which have different benchmarks. So I think if I take it in a way, like one is about some structural changes, which are dependent on the government's move in terms of how fast they can do that in terms of bringing in the new regulatory authority. They're talking about the National Research Foundation. They're given targets for that, and some budget allocations already happened. They're talking about the accreditation framework also, the new accreditation framework that has to be put in place. Once that comes in, maybe the whole way, the whole quality benchmarks are set and the expected outcomes will change. Because though we say that many of the institutions in the country are not accredited, but are we really hand-holding them towards achieving those accreditations? And also in some of the like disciplines, specifically if you talk about liberal arts or law, I think the benchmarks are also not there. So we have to really work on the benchmarks. So the right benchmarks are also not there.
Well, can you in 1 minute tell me what are the 3 things that you will be able to do from NEP point of view in your universities and institutions?
See, in
1 minute or so.
In our institutions, if you talk about the core focus has been on integration and sustainable goals, the sustainable development goals that we have been doing across in K-12 and as well as our in higher education institutions. So that is something that our institution really talks about, and the philosophy is about creating better human beings, and that is something that we have taken on ourselves. The other bit, if I talk about, is the integration of this vocational education in the whole delivery, because if you look at what the requirement of employers are, and if we look at the industry needs, I think even the World Economic Forum comes up with a figure that nearly 50% of the employees will need reskilling or upskilling by 2025. So if you look at that kind of parameter, where now with this industry 4.0, we don't have a linear approach. We are looking at innovations. We look at different kind of expectations even from our students. So I think the kind of outcome they expect or the traits they expect from the students in terms of project management skills or innovation or creativity or maybe problem solving skills. So I think we really need to work on that requirement from the industry. What are the future skills requirement? And also look at a space where there's a huge requirement of upskilling. So we see lots of edtechs coming into there, but I think as university also we have to really focus more on that. So that's one area that we are really very focused. Then research also, and we already are like a multidisciplinary institution itself. We have nearly 100+ courses. So we have those dimensions, but yeah, the traditional approach in the universities has been more departmentalized. Like, so all departments have been working in silos. So maybe that bit of really bringing in that kind of integration and involvement with the industry also is something that is one big area that we are looking at.
Dr. Bala, thank you. Professor Singh, one thing that stands out in this new education policy for you as an educator, as a professor and academician?
I think there are many things, but if you ask me one, I will not repeat what Dr. Bhalla has said, but I think that in the NEP, one of the major things, if you see, the first time in India, somebody has thought that we need to make India as an international brand. And the focus is on internationalizing the higher education sector. First time somebody thought that we need to also bring the students from abroad to India. If you look at, we were earlier only losing students. Students were going, in 90s, we saw a huge number, best of the brains after doing their programs from IIT, from IIMs or studying in top institutions. They were going and they were becoming the part of Harvard, doing their PhD or Princeton or Yale or Russell Group or Ivy League. But first time, I think that people have started thinking that how to bring the best of the brains from abroad to India, how to bring some of the students to India. And internationalization of education is something on which the NEP is concentrating at.
I think Professor Singh, it also syncs with your thought process in the institution. Let me go to Ashish as the last question. Ashish, we can answer in just 1 minute. I think we have already crossed the time limit. The investment that the schools, the K-12 players are making in technology, what kind of ROI you see out of these investments?
See, this mysterious area of EdTech, we see it in a very simple 3 parts to it: institutional, testing and test prep, and resources, digital content, and so on. The entry of technology, as other people also said, over the last 20 years came through the resources, vendors, providers, and the institutions and the test prep were more or less protected. What has happened in the last 4 or 5 years, and especially accelerated with COVID, is the penetration into the institutional space is complete. And as a result of that, what's going to happen is, I think the three areas are going to become more diffused. So ROI, from my perspective, and maybe I am saying more than I should, I think it's almost a survival investment to be made. Because if the class, which needed you to take a bus or take your car and travel and go through hoops and traffic and money, at 80% efficiency can be conducted sitting wherever you are. And it doesn't have to be a teacher if you're in Delhi, from Delhi. A teacher from Manila could be teaching you, or from Jakarta or a third place, at more or less the same cost. So I think from an institutional perspective, I think it's a survival and necessary investment.
So what you're saying, Ashish, is it is more survival than luxury. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your insightful views on policies, on practice, and on technology in the education space. We thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you so much for participating in this conclave. Me and my team, thank each of you for your time, and we look forward to interacting with all of you in the near future again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
The Indian education industry is on the verge of a massive realignment. The country has the largest population of school-going children in the world. That's about 260 million students enrolled in more than 1.5 million schools, according to government estimates. Now, you can add to that figure another 27.5 million undergraduate and postgraduate students enrolled in over 39,000 colleges. Now, this number is only expected to grow in the next decade, as the country also has the world's largest population of children in the age bracket of 5 to 24 years at about 500 million. Now, in this landscape, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought with it unprecedented challenges, as educational institutions across the country had to shift to a completely different model of teaching and learning almost overnight, transforming the face of education in 2020. But while systems adapted to changing student needs, what followed was an acceptance of online learning that accelerated the entire ecosystem's movement towards Education 4.0. What we see today is perhaps a preview into the future of learning, where a new model of education is emerging with the child at the center. Now let's look at India's online education market. It is expected to grow 10 times over the next 5 years, from 90 million individuals in FY20 to 133 million individuals by FY25. As technology and the National Education Policy 2020 act as catalysts for this change, the need of the hour is to develop an ecosystem which can offer an enriching educational experience for students, including a greater degree of personalization, upgraded learning resources from across the world, and flexibility with study dates and formats. So, what does the future of education really look like? Let's find out. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and joining me for today's session are Amitabh Jhingan, partner and lead for EY's India Education Practice and EY Parthenon's Emerging Markets Education Practice, and Amit Doshi, Chief Marketing Officer at Lenovo India, to look at the exciting possibilities that technology brings in the field of education to enable an empowered and educated tomorrow. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us for today's conversation. My first question will be broad-based, both of you, and that is, what are some of the external forces increasing the role of technology in education? Let's start with you, Amit, and then we'll hear Amitabh's views on the matter.
I think you set the context quite beautifully, Gautam, and all of us have seen tremendous disruption in the education sector, and just the way education has gone about in the last few months, and now has been an extended period of time, in fact. And we've not just seen it as part of the industry from a distance, but we've also seen it as parents and what's been happening around in our homes. And when we look at technology, technology, first of all, has been the force that has ensured that there is no discontinuity. And that was really the role of the technology transformation in what I call the first stage. And now, as we all get more used to embracing technology, using technology on a day-to-day basis, technology's role has to evolve and go beyond just the teacher-student interaction. And we believe that as educational institutes, schools, colleges go into a hybrid mode of learning, technology would be at the heart of it, right from how lessons are planned, to how classes run, to how assessments happen, to how students' engagement is measured, and how their learning outcomes are evaluated. And from a place where technology was this stopgap arrangement to make sure classes run without disruption, we believe that technology will take a center stage in the way the whole ecosystem really moves and works. So it is a disruptive time, but it's also an extremely exciting time for everyone in the industry.
All right, Amitabh, let me come to you. Amit sees technology taking the center stage in the education ecosystem. What's your view on this?
Yeah, thanks, Gautam. And no, I mean, I completely agree with, Amit on the fact that, technology is becoming more and more relevant. And we see it across many different dimensions. I mean, I think if I just committed more, I mean, if I just were to kind of get to that, probably the same end state, but from an education context. I mean, I think the way I see it, technology allows education providers and the education sector in general, the ability to flex, itself, to, adapt to the changing external dynamic, to events like what we've seen over the last 18 months with COVID and the lockdowns that have ensued, but also more broadly with the evolution and progression that education as a whole needs to undergo. So, there is talk about education 4.0. And again, I mean, look, there's many different terms and terminologies, but I think the reality is that education today is, and as we look forward, is more and more becoming learner centric. So it's all about the learner, and it's also becoming about skills. And and we all recognize that those skills may not be static; they will change and evolve. But I think it's that confluence, or it is that dimension of education, which I think is lending itself to a far more central role, for technology. And I think the need for education to now be more personalized, the need for education to be more flexible. I mean, people are increasingly consuming education over longer periods of time, in different modes, and with perhaps more flexibility around, delivery. And then comes the skill dimension, which is the need to have far more practical, real world, perhaps even industry aligned. And again, I'm not saying industry aligned is the only way to do it. I mean, it works, it's relevant in some cases, but I think, holistic, kind of education and the faculty to deliver that are people who may not necessarily be full-time professors or even faculty members. And I think, that dimension of education, and finally, the very clear shift towards project-based, skill-based learning, which again can greatly be, enhanced and empowered by technology, I think is in my view, the big, kind of driver for this much more central role that technology needs to play, and to some degree is playing in education.
All right. Following up what you said, Amit, I mean, a lot of the conversations I have around digital transformation, the focus has gone into outcomes. So from your perspective, how is technology impacting and driving the future of education? If you could give us some case studies, some examples which illustrate your point.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, I think outcomes kind of, are really, I think a kind of an outcome of use cases in a manner of speaking, right? So really, I mean, if you think about the real life situations that technology is solving, I think that should give you a pretty good glimpse of outcomes. I mean, I think 3 or 4 areas that I'd like to flag off there. The ability to use technology to access, analyze, and perhaps data around student types, student performance, student preferences, and to almost predict student performance. I mean, we've seen a number of universities do this, both for managing and monitoring the student journey through the education system. We're also looking at universities adopting sort of this to perhaps structure very sharply focused remedial programs around students, and also make decisions around acceptances, which in turn again allows the system to be much more aligned with what student performance is. So I think that's one very clear kind of area that we see. I think the other big area is around student assessment. So completion of courses, completion rates have always been a challenge for kind of, I think, a spectrum of institutions, but even more so for higher education institutions. And it becomes a bit more relevant when you talk about publicly funded institutions. So I think the ability to almost structure assessments that are more customized and more aligned to identifying sort of student progress, but also tracking student progress, but also predicting, I would say, just course completion becomes sort of, in my view, another very interesting use case. So the use of technology to significantly drive assessments, I would say, would be the second part. And then the third is, of course, just management of the end-to-end education process, right? I mean, you've got the entire student journey, right, from before a student enters kind of the university, to actually admissions, onboarding, going through the education journey, and then of course graduating, but and then continuing to stay connected with an institution as an alumni. Institutions are again leveraging technology very, very successfully across this entire life cycle, to be able to kind of maintain strong engagement and connectivity with students, both past, present, and future. And I think so that's it. So these would be just 3 examples of kind of how some of this is playing out. I think initiatives, public initiatives, which are essentially modeled around governance. So the SQAA program, for example, which is being talked about, is, I think, again another very, very interesting example. It's a variant of what I've already talked about, but very clearly focused on governance of either institutions or systems, with a very clear focus on leveraging data and information for decision making, but also having a real-time, regular and rigorous monitoring and evaluation framework and system for tracking performance of institutions and progression of institutions. So I think, I mean, these would just be 3, 4 kind of the key, I would say, just examples that I would think of as I think about the kind of use of technology in the context of education.
All right, Amit, let me bring you in at this point. What's the vision in the C-suite in terms of technology acting as a key enabler for the future of education? You've heard Amitabh illustrate wonderfully all those examples and points that he mentioned. Anything that you have to add in terms of the broader vision of how it should be crafted when it looks at technology enabling a better future of education?
That's a great question. And I actually don't see it any different from how the troika of people, processes, and technology work in any company or any industry. And as Amitabh already said it's become learner-centric. So, and it's not just about it being learner-centric, it also has to become educator-centric, because it's not just about the person who's receiving knowledge, it's also about the person who's imparting it. So that's the people aspect of it. And then, of course, processes, because newer processes will have to emerge. The same processes may not hold any longer in the newer order of education. And then if you put technology as the centerpiece, then technology doesn't have an isolated role, and technology doesn't exist for the sake of existing. But technology then takes on the larger podium, the larger stage of enabling people, whether it's the educator workforce, the learner community, or the administration that runs education institutes. And secondly, enabling processes, enabling the current processes, making them more efficient, and empowering newer processes that need to come in a hybrid format. So that's how we really see it. And therefore, our focus is very clear. Our focus is about three things, Gautam. The first is about building superior experiences through our technology for learners. The second is to build end-to-end IT solutions that can help education institutes and educators to operate better across the students' lifespan within educational institute. And finally, it's about creating opportunities, creating forums like these, where we're able to bring the best minds in education, right from policy to experts like Amitabh, to the industry, to come together. It is a complex problem. It is a multi-sectoral, it requires a multi-sectoral solutioning. And that's what we really focused on as a brand, to enable that conversation.
All right. Interesting that you mentioned people, process, and technology. One thing which ties all of them together is data. And you mentioned about this, Amitabh, and I want to take it forward as to the role of data and the outcomes in aiding education from here on, because data is going to be much, much more important than it is right now. So where do things progress from here when it comes especially to data and outcomes from the lens of people, process, and technology?
So, I mean, I think that's a great question. And I mean, I think, look, I think there's work to be done. I think there's a lot of ground to cover across all three dimensions. So I think, most businesses, I mean, I think I wouldn't single out education, but I think definitely, I think, and then within that, I mean, I would say certainly educational institutions have perhaps, not been, at the cutting edge of, use of, data. And I think this is, really it's a historical kind of phenomenon. But, but I think three or four forces, I think, are kind of, again, not very different from what we talked about at the beginning of this discussion, are, I think, converging to compete with a Stanford or an MIT or a Caltech that is today offering programs with in partnership with the online providers with the same with obviously to learners in India. So I think a rapidly sort of reshaped competitive dynamic, and then finally obviously the desire to perhaps achieve scale or create impact at scale. So I think these are the four big factors which I think are converging to really highlight and amplify the role of data as we think about use of data in education. I think the areas that where data would be is being leveraged, and I think will continue to be leveraged, is, as I think I covered this, but I think it's really around personalizing the learning journey for a learner, so for a student. So identifying and then kind of recognizing, and then of course adapting the education, the learning experience for each individual learner by understanding their preferences, their strengths and weaknesses, and of course their performance on sort of standardized assessments. I think the second area is just assessments as a whole. So this whole concept of large scale assessments, which would be more relevant, I would say, to the public K-12 systems, but I would imagine to maybe slightly lesser degree, they would also be relevant to higher and continuing education segments. But I think the ability to conduct large scale assessments, we've seen examples of what, for example, the PISA, the OECD does with the PISA test, which allows systems and of course educational institutions within systems to benchmark themselves across the country, the region, the globe, and I think that's sort of a very, very powerful use of data, and that can only be done with sort of big data type capabilities. The third area where data would play in my view, a significant role is around decision making and planning. So as I talked about a few examples of universities that are using data to predict dropouts, universities that are using data to make decisions around acceptance, institutions that are using data to make decisions around even lending. I mean, you probably would have heard about upskilling providers who are working on what is called an income sharing model, where they actually don't charge a fee but charge a a percentage of the future income of a learner, which is all backed by data and analytics. So decision making and kind of making much more evolved models. And then finally, governance, monitoring performance, and of course identifying and remedying underperformance would be the fourth area where I think data and data-based systems would play a very, very significant role in the times to come in the context of education.
All right. Amit, you had laid out the broader vision of Lenovo's involvement in this space. Going into specifics, what are the key programs which Lenovo spearheaded in 2020?
And for us, it's a continuum, Gautam. We've been fairly consistent on our strategy. Now, if we look at learners, what we really want to do is provide superior learning experiences on their devices, which has become today paramount to a good absorption of what's coming their way. So when you look at our computers, when you look at our tablets, they're all today enabled with smart learning experiences, smart learning software features that, for example, help with gentle suggestions and nudge on digital well-being. Hey, have you spent too much time in front of the screen? You might want to take a break. Or if there is a sensing that the engagement is lowered, it could be a suggestion in that direction. Or simply to do with distance and posture, very, very small things, but they go a long way in the overall well-being. So that's what we are powering our PCs, our laptops, our tablets with. And right now, a core objective is to build awareness and make sure that there's adoption for that. Now, when it comes to educational institutes, we're very, very focused on making sure we really understand what their evolving requirements are. And we have a smart education suite of solutions that we've launched, which can actually customize solutions end to end, depending on what the educational institute requires. So that's really our B2B play. And then finally, it's about making sure we are doing our bit. We are contributing to the evolution that's happening for education in India. And for example, the SmarterEd Conclave is one of them. In the past, we started a platform last year called SmarterEd, Lenovo SmarterEd.com, which actually invited volunteers like you and me to come on board, sign up as volunteer teachers, and reach out to those kids who don't have access to good teachers. By the way, we have a shortage of 1 million teachers in India. And that was one attempt to bridge that gap using a technology platform. We're now taking SmarterEd to the next stage. And we're building SmarterEd into an end-to-end platform that can address the digital transformation needs of educational institutes, that can help parents and learners get better at a hybrid form of education, and also get people involved in causes. There was a wonderful initiative that the government just launched. It's called Vidyanjali, which is actually about calling volunteers and connecting them with schools which actually need help. And we started off last year with SmarterEd in a very limited way, just around teacher volunteers. So we have this third pillar on our platform, which is about bridging the digital divide by either helping device donation, or you could volunteer your time and really contribute to the cause of education in a wider sense. So that's really what we're trying to do, and that's where the digital maturity index also comes into play. We felt that educational institutes in India, digital transformation is new for everyone. It is complex, it's new, it requires a certain level of skill and understanding to traverse that trajectory. It is a maturity, it's a journey of maturity, and we believe that if we're able to provide a good, solid, consistent framework for educational institutes in India, it could be a small but an important step for them to assess where do they stand and what do they really need to do to move to the next level of maturity. And that's something that personally I'm very, very excited about.
Amit, could you tell us more about the Lenovo SmarterEd Digital Maturity Index with the knowledge part by EY? Give us more details around that.
So I'll just give you maybe a brief overview and then hand it over to Amitabh, whose team we believe has done a stellar job in helping put together this digital maturity index. And when we started speaking to Amitabh and his team, we were very, very clear about what we wanted. We wanted to create something which is like a very, very simple diagnostic tool. If you were, let's say, if you are someone who's running an educational institute or administering it, or you're running the IT systems in an educational institute, you can come to this tool, you can answer a very simple set of questions, and then EY and Lenovo's expertise would go through your responses and then give you an assessment on where does the educational institute today stand in the digital transformation journey. So I could be, for example, I could be a beginner, I could be an intermediate, I could be an advanced. I'm just giving you an example, but it gives a very, very simple framework for people to first of all know where do they stand, and secondly, more importantly, what do they need to do to get to the next level of maturity, to ensure that they're providing a superior learner experience, they're providing educators the infrastructure that they need to teach better, and on the whole, they're providing the institute with the right kind of technology to run systems efficiently and effectively. So that's like the 30,000 feet explanation of the index. But Amitabh's really the best person to get into more details.
Well, that's what the collaboration was about. Let's hear from Amitabh about the framework, the assessment framework. Over to you, Amitabh.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I mean, look, I think we're really excited about what we have put together and what we will be kind of hopefully achieving with this. I think this is something that's absolutely it's unique, but I think it's also very, very timely, but also I think it's a big need as far as the education sector is concerned. As Amit said, the digital maturity index would essentially look to help institutions assess their maturity across 4 key dimensions. And I think it's sort of following the people, process, technology curve, but with a little bit of more specificity. So the 4 dimensions that would be evaluated or that would be used to assess the maturity of an institution would be, the strategic, dimension, which is really essentially, trying to understand how clear, is the digital strategy of an organization and how, aligned it is to the broader vision of the organization in sort of a very clear and a concise and a cohesive manner and a coherent manner. I think the second dimension of the assessment index is the people dimension, which is really around the leadership and the organizational construct that exists around powering digital initiatives across the organization, and of course the skills and the frameworks that are available to impart those skills across the organization. So that's the people dimension. The third dimension is the process dimension, which is to essentially where we look at both the level and extent of digitization. So what part of the overall process digital or digitized, and of course the second almost ancillary aspect would be what is the level of standardization that exists, which kind of lends itself to lends processes to greater levels of digitization. And then the fourth aspect is an infrastructure aspect, to say what is the extent of almost a technology infrastructure, but also resources, partnerships, and also the human capital aspect in terms of the broader set of almost resources that are committed, allocated, and available to an institution to support and implement its digital agenda. So these are the 4 dimensions on which the assessment index, has been set up. 5 levels of maturity, and each level has very clearly defined around what kind of constitutes the best in class performance for each level. And I think we've done that keeping the diversity and perhaps the Indian education sector in mind. We realize that there are large, everyone sort of must be incentivized and encouraged to embark on a digital journey, and therefore we are very, very conscious of the fact that there cannot be a one size that fits all. And then finally, the way we would conduct this assessment would be to really look at, assess organizations on these 4 dimensions, but with 6 very specific, almost experience. The use of data-driven decision making. The ability of an institution to sustain and maintain its competitive positioning, by leveraging digital. Increased efficiency or a focus on sort of efficiency, continuous improvement of processes, and finally, the ability to identify new revenue streams by leveraging technology. Use cases which we would overlay onto the 4 dimensions to make sure that the assessment that's being done is, grounded in the real world and in kind of almost real world outcomes that institutions are looking to deliver to their stakeholders. So that's a little bit about the framework. I would encourage and request and call each one of you or every single educational institution in the country to sign up for this assessment and be able to themselves on this digital maturity and kind of chalk out their roadmap to achieve excellence in this area. So it's a fantastic sort of initiative. Would sort of urge every single education institution in the country to actually adopt and to actually sign up and undergo this assessment, and encourage the value that this framework would provide.
Absolutely. And those links are available for you, the viewer, to access and nominate your institute. But it's been a ranging conversation, and with so much disruption expected and smart initiatives like Lenovo's SmarterEd program, the future of education in India indeed looks very exciting. So thank you. So technology is playing the center stage role in developing the future of education. Thank you so much to our viewers for tuning in as well. This is Gautam Srinivasan signing off.